Yeah. Siege. Riley. Taz. Yeah. Set me free and give me death, there ain't no other choices. When I lay down to go to sleep, I keep on hearing voices. Little whispers in my head, man, is you fake or loyal? Why no water, death to sign a baby, pick your poison. These little demons living underneath my bed, creeping. Know the real, monster lives above them all, sleeping. That subtle breathing in your closet every single evening. Thought you never see me again, looks can be deceiving. When they hear the sound of the drum, they'll be saying, oh Lord, here they come. Yeah, here we come. Here we come. Here we come. Here we come. I used to think that people die because they wicked. Nowadays people wanna see you dead because you gifted. Been ready for my tomb since I came up out the womb. So no matter what, I'm coming back and paying you a visit. Saw it coming, I predicted, but y'all wouldn't listen. No, you can't protect your riches if you never burn bridges. Flip pages, went places, made changes, still dangerous. Now I'm back, altercation, hold still. I make it painless how it feel, baby. When you say you love me, is it real, baby? Full speed, both hands on the wheel, baby. Young Taz coming from the Mobile, baby. You know the drill, baby. Yeah. And when you hear the sound of the drum, we'll be saying, here we come. Yeah, here we come. Hey, here we come. Here we come. Here we come. Yeah, here we come. Hey, here we come. Hey, here we come. Here we come.
Welcome to the Dire Wolf Show, where we believe that America is exceptional and that our constitutional rights should never be infringed. I am Dire Wolf. On our show, we bring you the truth and debunk fake news. If you love laughing at the insanity of the regressive left, sit back and relax. Boy, do I have a show for you.
Welcome back, Wolfpack. Dire Wolf here for yet another weekly news recap. Behind enemy lines on YouTube, where speech isn't free and the truth is demonetized. We're going to try something different on today's show. I didn't tell Fox this, but we're going to try something revolutionary. This time, we're going to actually let you hear his side of the conversation.
Dire Wolf is trying to censor me. If you can hear me in chat, let me know in chat. Or if you can hear me, let me know in chat.
Yes. Please tell us this time if you cannot hear him, because me talking to myself and only half the conversation is probably way less entertaining.
It was about half as entertaining as that one time when I wasn't here and you did the show by yourself, but you also muted yourself, and it was just like nothing for like 30 minutes.
That was still 50% more entertaining than you.
I believe after that, when I watched it on my way home, I think I sent you a text like, "I will never leave you, never leave you again."
Apparently, they can hear you, boss. All right. So, of course, alongside me is my co-host Fox Trevize. How are you doing today?
Oh, not too bad. I tried this new shampoo today though, and now I'm bald. So you know, it was. I found it in the wood glue section at Lowe's. I heard it was really good at getting stuff out of your hair. And to be fair, it technically is. Just because
yes, just brings the hair with it.
Yes.
Requires surgery.
Yeah. So I mean, on like effective, yes. Maybe too effective. I mean, I guess it depends on what you're ranking it as.
Yeah, so that brings up today's sponsor. We're sponsored by Gorilla Glue. Not really. So everyone, you remember that everyone must know the story now about the Gorilla Glue lady who's like 40 and decided that she was going to use Gorilla Glue as a hair product. I don't know why she thought that Gorilla Glue was meant as a product for her to use on her hair. It seems like she must be really stupid, or she's trying to.
Who do you think she voted for?
I think she probably was so dumb she didn't even vote for Biden. She probably voted for like someone who wasn't running.
Yes, but do you think that her vote was still cast for Biden, regardless of who she voted for?
Yes,
that was
yes,
the correct answer.
Yes, no matter who she voted for, it was cast for Biden.
Yes, because that's how safe and secure voting works now.
Yes. And then if there's any kind of concerns about elections being, fraudulent or corrupted, don't you dare say you would like to be investigated, because then you are subverting democracy. I mean, creating from whole cloth false evidence to unseat a president and modifying evidence and lying, that's okay. To subvert, that's not subverting democracy.
Yeah, chat is noting that the Gorilla Glue lady is not dead, so the probability that she voted's less than if she was dead.
Well, yes, but they were taking people from minority groups and voting on their behalf as well.
Is putting wood glue in your hair a minority group?
No, but she is black, so.
Oh, well.
Which made me think, when I first saw the story, that a black woman put Gorilla Glue in their hair, that it was a racist meme. And then when I looked a little further, I realized it was a real story. I'm like, I've lost all faith in humanity.
Yeah, that adds some uncomfortable connotation.
Right? I mean, it seems like a joke that someone who's racist might think of.
It's like when I forget what his name is, but it's this rapper guy who said that in Planet of the Apes, he said that he wanted royalties because he thought one of the apes looked like him.
The guy with the blue vest, yeah.
Yeah, it had a blue vest on, and it did not look like the blue vest that he normally wears. But he was just he looked at this monkey and identified it as himself, and everybody was like, no one did that. You did that. You're the one who said that. No one else thought that you were nobody else made that connection that you looked like a monkey. They
jump on that and say, yes, this is completely legitimate, because they say, yeah, we do see them that way, right? Yes. Just like anytime that they make, by that I mean any lawmaker makes a law that punishes criminals or restricts criminals in some way, they say, why are you doing this to minority groups? I'm like, whoa, are you saying that minority groups are synonymous with criminals? Because that's not. We're actually going to target people who've committed crimes. And you're saying this targets minority groups.
Well, so, Dyer, who's going to scrub the toilets?
Exactly. Or you do anything that makes it so that they ensure that you are actually a citizen to vote. They're saying, oh, you're just trying to restrict the vote from minority groups. So you're saying that a black person isn't smart enough to know how to get a license or find a polling station.
Debunked multiple times.
Was that?
Has been debunked multiple times. They do, in fact, know where the DMV is. Yes.
So anytime you do something reasonable, they assume that you're actually attacking minority groups. Anyways, let's get into our actual stories. This is a story that we started and went halfway through on Wednesday. We're going to do it again. Take two.
So if you're here on Wednesday, some of this might be familiar. Some of it you might be hearing for the first time. All right, so, which actually I need to pull up the article again because...
article is in the news.
Yes.
So
I know, but I want to read it along on screen so that they can see it.
Yes. So basically we're going to be just responding to this article because just describing it wouldn't be sufficient. I want you guys to see what they said with their own words. But basically, Time has admitted on behalf of the Democrats and the mainstream media that they did indeed rig the election and that they are proud of it and they're justifying it, and they wanted to show us what they've done. Let's go through the story.
You can read the first part, then I'll read the article.
Okay, so like a criminal returning to the scene of the crime, Time magazine, a member of the Democrat media establishment, has published an article joyfully taking credit for rigging the election. Here is that said article.
All right, so a weird thing happened right after November 3rd election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Right-wing militias were girding for battle, which as we as I described last time, girding for battle is what militias do. Literally, the entire purpose of a militia is to prepare for battle. Like it's like an uncommon thing. It's like runners, they were running. It's like, yes, that's what they do. So militias preparing for battle. It's not, I don't know if that's news. It's just like the definition of what a militia is.
Yeah, and also, why is that menacing? It's like saying the police were planning to protect their communities.
Yes.
You know?
Exactly. Like the military was prepared. Like you were preparing for battle. It's like, yes, it's like what you do. That's your job.
Yes. It's
like me and you like today is like, we're commentators and we prepared for a show. Like that's not news. It's just part of our job.
Exactly. So they're trying to make it sound menacing that right-wing militias were getting ready for battle.
What do you think? What does girding actually mean?
Girding means to tighten down your belt.
To encircle a person or part of the body with a belt or a brand.
Yeah, it's like a piece of armor, not just belt, but
or preparing oneself for something difficult or challenging.
Right. So they were they're trying to make it sound menacing that they were getting ready, preparing to defend their communities. But really, the problem here is that the liberal groups, that the activist groups that they're going to later on in this article be praising their efforts, they were the ones committing acts of violence that resulted in the militia groups being forced to defend their communities.
Yeah, exactly. Like the entire, like the sentence just prior, liberal groups vowed to take to the streets. Of course, the right-wing militias are going to be preparing for battle because they saw what liberal groups taking to the streets looked like for the last 6 months. That we know exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, burning down buildings, killing people, destroying commerce and business, taking over parts of the city,
hunting people down, chasing them down, executing them in the streets.
Yep.
Burning them
alive. Shutting down public services in certain areas.
Taking over entire city blocks so that you can execute a bunch of black kids.
Yes.
Isn't that? Could you imagine? That's never been talked about other than by us and even by right-wing commentators at all. Like they've not touched that. Over the summer, I think this is an aside, but over the summer, Antifa took over several city blocks and then used that power that they seized from the city to execute 3 black children. That's insane. Like that's like KKK level, like early 1900s KKK level stuff. Like that's what they would do. They would roll into town, they would round up some blacks, and they would execute them. That's what the Democrat Party KKK would do in the early 1900s. And I mean, Antifa certainly isn't a Republican division. I think that's Democrats again, and it's same old, same old. They just used less rope this time.
Yeah, and we've seen that Antifa has quite a lot of racist in their ranks, that they are often motivated by racism, and that they're only using the support of BLM and minorities as a cover for what their revolution they're trying to enact.
Yeah. All right. So in a poll before Election Day, 75% of Americans voiced concerns about violence. Gosh, I wonder why they'd be concerned about violence. Maybe, again, all summer. Instead, an eerie quiet descended. So instead of chaos, an eerie quiet descended. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. I think they missed a comma there. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7th, jubilation broke out instead as people thronged cities across the U.S. to celebrate the democratic process that resulted in Trump's ouster.
So they said that if Trump lost, that they suspected right-wing violence, that there would be many acts of violence and civil unrest if Trump lost and it was close. And that this proved that was false. The real source of violence was that we were living under the threat of violence if Biden didn't win, that they would punish us with violence, and everyone was afraid of the left-wing violence, and that's why it was so important that Trump lose, because the left would hurt us otherwise. That is their justifications. We are safer now. Look, we had this huge threat of violence that we're causing, that we're supporting, that we've been organizing ourselves, and we've been saved by that. See, we saved you from the violence that we were causing by ensuring that Trump lost. That's what they're saying. They're basically, what's the word? They're coercing us, right? By creating the threat of violence and then saying that they saved us from it.
Yeah. It's you know, it's kind of like an abusive relationship, right? So you got the one who'll, you know, hits people, and then they'll say, okay, you know, like, you made me do that. And then if the person, like, tries to defend themselves, they'll just be like, well, like, now you're the one, like, you're escalating. Like, you're the one, like, wanting to defend yourself is you escalating.
Yeah.
Which goes back to the escalation test that I talked about a few weeks ago, which is a lot of people on the left and some on the right, they're calling for de-escalation on both sides. And it's like, okay, well, what does de-escalation look like on the right? Well, it looks like what happened all summer. When the right de-escalates, the country burns. That's basically what that ends up looking like.
Right.
Okay. So... let's see here. So a second odd thing happened aimed at Trump's attempts to reverse the result. Corporate America turned on him. Yes, that's right, folks. You might have thought that corporate America had turned on Trump like in 2016, but they actually it's just happened just now. There is no history before right now. It's just now. You can't go back in time at all. There's no such thing as history. Corporate America was actually fully on board with Trump, and they donated tens of thousands of dollars to him. Of thousands. Meanwhile, donating billions to his opponents in the Democrat Party.
So I want to point out that they're trying to say he was just trying to reverse the results, meaning that the results were already determined and that there was no question about them. That Biden was absolutely the winner. They're calling it for him, and that is part of their messaging, right? The whole point of what they are saying they did here was that they controlled the messaging to make it sound like Biden had clearly won, that there was no question about it. That was their goal, right, is to make sure that there was no questioning of those results. What Trump was actually doing was pointing out very clear, very organized mass attempts and, sorry, not just attempts, mass fraud and false voting that had happened that, for the sake of our democracy, has to be investigated, has to be resolved to determine whether or not it did change the results or would have changed the results before it's actually finalized. They're trying to give a villainous appearance to Trump's actions and it's not just Trump, by the way. It's many millions of conservatives who wanted this to happen. He was acting on their best interest, right? Because they voted, and he wanted to make sure that their votes counted. He wanted to make sure that the person who actually won was the one who won.
Well, and I mean, there was every reason to believe that there was problems with the election, right? We had the entire summer running up to the election where the Democrats, almost for a whole year, were running stories about problems with Dominion voting, problems with mail-in voting. They were setting up the stage for them calling it fraud if Trump had won. They were setting up all the groundwork. There was a bunch of articles. There was a bunch of, John Oliver did a segment, a bunch of the other late night hosted segments on, problems with the election systems and where there was flaws and security vulnerabilities. And they were laying all this groundwork so that there was a history so that if Trump had won, they could just say, well, we've been saying for a year now that there was problems with the election. You actually had Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar have their signatures on a resolution that is condemning Dominion voting system for not being secure.
That was the long game they were playing.
Yeah. So you've got this situation where they've been setting up the stage for there's going to be voter fraud, and then as soon as Trump loses, they're like, well, to say that there was election fraud, that's just terrible.
That's threatening our democracy right there.
Yeah. Very similar to when it looked like Trump was going to lose in 2016. And Obama was saying, right before the election, well, the idea that America's election could even be hacked, it's just ludicrous. And then immediately they pivoted to like, well, of course it was hacked. It was the Russians. And so it just depends on whoever wins. The Democrats have challenged every single election that they've lost for like the last 50 years. So this isn't like what they want to make what Trump did unique, but it just was not unique. And then you also have where let's see, they're saying that Trump's attempt to reverse the result. Well, that was before the result was finalized. The result wasn't finalized until January 6th. And what the media was trying to do was they were trying to pretend that the process of the Electoral College certification and the vote casting and then the Electoral College vote counting, that was just ceremony, and that the media calling the election, that was the real legally binding thing that creates the election, when the exact opposite is true. It's the Electoral College and that stuff that is the defining thing, and the ceremony is the media calling it. Like, that's the ritual that we go through, but it's not the thing that actually triggers the president being the president. That's the Electoral College thing. But the media very much wanted to have control over that, and it's just been like that for so long that the media always calls it, and they're always in line with the Electoral College, that they were trying to trick you, or they're trying to trick the rest of the American people by just saying like, well, it's called, it's over. The media calls. The media is the one who gets to call the president, not the Electoral College. That's just ceremony.
Right.
All right. So let's see here. So hundreds of major business leaders whom backed Trump's candidacy, supported his policies, called on him to concede. To the president, something felt amiss. It was all very, very strange, Trump said on December 2nd. Within days of the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. Well, and there's nothing objectionable about that quote, and they even in the next line say, in a way, Trump was right, because in a way, yes, Trump was right. The way that he was right is the fact that he said something true.
Yes.
In a way. It's the way is because it's true. So like anoint's actually a good word here, because that goes along with what I was saying. Like, the media were trying to declare something that they didn't have the authority to declare. They declared Biden the president long before the Electoral College was solidified, was approved, and then the votes cast. And again, it's the Electoral College that's what actually decides the president. Any other effort by the media to try to declare a president, I would say anoint a pretty calm term for that, but it's not wrong. The media thinks that they're the priestly class and they can just declare the winner. And that's not true. They can observe and report the winner, but somewhere along the lines that observing and reporting the winner, the media thought that they were the ones that got to pick it. And it's just not true.
Yes.
Let's see here. So, in a way, Trump was right. How was
Yes.
Trump right, Dyer?
Trump was right in that he was right. That there was, and they're going to admit here in a second, that there was an organized scheme between business owners and the media to say Trump won, no matter what contests were going on, and just so that they controlled the messaging to make sure that they got the desired outcome, what they thought was better for us. No matter what the vote was, they believed it was better for our country to, fraud or not, that Biden win. And they took every step they could to make sure that was the result. So the article went on to say, there was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtails the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs.
A conspiracy?
Both,
like a conspiracy theory or a conspiracy fact?
A conspiracy fact, because not every conspiracy is false. So both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists, the same ones that have been burning down the cities for the last 8 months, and business titans, including mainstream media companies and social media companies. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and AFL-CIO, published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, sometimes that's an understatement, racial justice protests, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. So, again, they're admitting that they wanted to make sure that Trump lost because they wanted to avoid the violence that they cultivated and were perpetrators of. So the groups that were working together to make sure Biden was declared unquestionably the winner and that no one looked into the actual, possible fraud were the same people who were threatening us with violence if Trump were to win. The handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election, an extraordinary shadow effort dedicated not to winning the vote, but to ensuring it would be free and fair, credible and uncorrupted. They may call it that, fair, credible, and uncorrupted, but if you wanted it to be fair and credible and uncorrupted, you would take any evidence of fraud, investigate and litigate it to ensure that everyone who's seeing this is comfortable knowing that that the results are legitimate. Not answering them, throwing out the cases on procedural grounds, leaves people without ever fully knowing, and most likely suspecting not, that the fraud, that the vote might have been vastly different if that fraud had not happened. They actually were doing the exact opposite. They were not allowing fairness because some people's votes were never counted as what they should have been. Some people's votes were thrown out, were burned, left on the side of the street. The election did not look any more credible. It looks incredible. It looks like it has no credit to it, and it looks corrupted. But their actions to declare the winner without actually fairly vetting the results does the exact opposite of what they're saying they did. The article went on to say, for more than a year, a loose, organized coalition of operatives scrambled to shore up American institutions as they came under simultaneous attack from a remorseless pandemic and autocratically inclined president. Through much of this what did Trump do to attack the election process?
What was Trump doing autocratically even? Jesus.
I mean, are you saying like executive orders? Because I don't think it's a standard you want to apply to Trump.
Jesus.
Because Biden has had over 40 executive orders. In his
No.
first,
You're way behind, buddy. He's up at like 56 now. That was as of Wednesday.
Yeah, that's still over. I just know the exact number. So yeah, he's done far more than any president before him in such a shorter time, and they were done so haphazardly. They're causing more damage, right? Like removing something without actually knowing what it was doing and not replacing it with something better causes so much more damage. We actually have some stories later on about things he's undone that are horribly damaging. We've also done other stories on that same topic. So they're just calling him autocratically inclined, but he actually did nothing to harm the integrity of our elections. However, what they're about to praise, which was the Democrats instituting mail-in voting, universal mail-in voting, which they themselves say is ripe for fraud. Them doing this before the pandemic, but using the pandemic as an excuse, was premeditated fraud. They were planning for there to be fraud, and they were laying the groundwork to, in case they lost, to use that same thing that they imposed as their reasoning for why they thought Trump was causing fraud. It is a long game where they played both sides, so they have an excuse either way for the propaganda war. So the article went on to say, though much of this activity took place on the left, it was separate from the Biden campaign. I doubt it, and crossed ideological lines. Saying Romney was on your side is not saying ideological. Like,
no. They had the Lincoln Project with them too, right? They're all sniffing kids together.
Yeah, the Lincoln Project, which are
evaporated this week.
Evaporated because of
I think we're going to get into that later, though.
It's not actually on the script, so we can do it now.
Well, let's finish this part. We'll go back to that. Well, sorry, do you have the Goodell or whatever her name is story in there too?
I do.
Okay, I'll bring it up then.
Okay, so with ideological line, but not really. There's using never Trumpers, which are elitist Republicans who don't care about you at all, and they just care about their own power and influence. Ideological lines with crucial contributions by nonpartisan and conservative actors. I highly doubt they were conservatives. The scenario the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was a Trump victory. They were desperate to stop a Trump victory. It was not desperate to ensure a fair election. It was to prevent Trump from winning. It wasn't to ensure that votes were properly counted or that fraud did not happen. Those things were actually means to their ends of preventing a Trump victory. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all, a failure of the central act of democratic self-governance, and it has been a hallmark of Americans since its founding. No.
So part of the core, the back in the day. Now it's gotten a little out of control, but the kind of core concept around socialism and communism, which is what the Democrats are operating off of right now, centralized totalitarianism. One of the core concepts of that is that it's a science-based process, right? That the left always likes to bring up science. Again, what they actually are doing with that is not matching the language they're using, but this is how they've described themselves historically, is that this is a scientific process. It's the science of history. That's what progressivism is. And the science of history, when you run that out forward, they say they're progressives because they're progressing towards a known destination in the future. It's them. The science of the future should lead you to their form of government. So anything that deviates from them controlling the government and them controlling society, that's anti-science. That's against the grain. So preserving democracy, when they say that, they mean that they're preserving the correct outcome. And they actually, I believe they use that language in here to say that Biden winning was the correct outcome, because that's what matches up with their predestination to the future. Trump winning, that doesn't match up. That's deviating. So that must be anti-science. It's against the grain of history from where they think that we're headed, because again, they're the scientists. They're the ones who have all the plans and all the social formulas and all that stuff. They're the ones who plan and they have structure. And Trump in their conservative ideology, that doesn't fit their structure. So it's anti-science and it's anti the correct course of history. The correct course of history in their mind is progressing towards their ultimate control over society.
The democratic process actually requires that opportunity to legally challenge and vet the results of the election, because it is an integral part of ensuring the integrity of our elections. So people making challenges to it is not threatening the democratic process. It's following the democratic process by ensuring the legitimacy of the vote. What they've done was actually the failure of the central act of democracy, because a shadow cabal of very wealthy people and activist groups who they are funding. So it's like saying that they're working together. No. They were controlling them. It is just the elites at the top who are pulling the strings of those groups. And then they're saying that it was labor working with capital. No. It's capital controlling people that are claiming are labor, but most of them don't even have fucking jobs. Their job was being an activist, right? So it was this shadow cabal of elites who determined the results of the election, determined what was the correct results, and then used their levers of power to ensure that result.
So to give some concrete examples of that, so what we're learning now is that groups like Mark Zuckerberg's foundation, they funded directly city election boards so they could run their elections in the cities for the presidential election and then also in the Georgia runoffs. And normally those election offices would be funded by taxpayer dollars because they're a government body. That's who's supposed, the local governments are supposed to run the election, not the federal government, and certainly not a corporation. But Mark Zuckerberg, quote unquote, donated to key areas, key districts, to give them a lot of extra money for the election effort. And we're learning now what they did with that money was they went out and hired, quote unquote, they certified election officials. Normally they wouldn't have enough money to support all of these certifications, but in the combination of COVID and everybody working from home and mail-in elections, mail-in voting and all that stuff, Zuckerberg gave them enough money to let them just deputize really large groups of people for being authorized election officials. Now, what does being an authorized election official allow you to do? Well,
it allows you to have votes in a box underneath the table, and then when all the poll watchers leave, you pull them out and run them through a machine 3 times, right?
Yes. Also, it allows the key thing though is that we're finding out now is it allowed them to do ballot harvesting, because if it's an election official going around to collect ballots, that's not ballot harvesting. That's just the election working as it's supposed to, right? You actually had, I think that they admitted too in this article that they've specifically targeted recruiting of election officials of a certain kind. So this is where you start getting into, I forget what the direct quote is, and I can't remember which of the historic totalitarians said it, but it was something along the lines of like, it really doesn't matter what the votes are, it matters who's counting the votes. And we see that the people counting the votes were by and large purchased by Mark Zuckerberg rather directly. And well, kind of interesting what the results of that were. Other large tech companies were in on that too. And there's actually been some discussion at the state level in various states about trying to propose legislation that would prevent corporations from donating money to city governments for the purpose of election boards. Because
all behind it, but it's a little fucking late, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little fucking late. Yeah, so that's typical GOP stuff.
Oh god, we got nuked. Late. Maybe we should outlaw nukes or something. Let's have a committee about that.
Maybe. But yeah. So I guess we'll be keeping an eye on that in the moving forward.
Maybe Ted Cruz will write a book about it. Moving on.
He's got so many books he's writing. I don't know if he's got time. And he's also got that podcast. So, all right. So for Trump and his allies, were running their own campaign. What? For Trump and his allies were running their own campaign.
Yeah, the grammar of this article was not great.
What in the hell is going on? They're using these ridiculous SAT words, and then they just can't get basic grammar down. There's a couple other sentences earlier on that I was tripping over, or it
wasn't your fault. The sentence really was poorly written. That was the problem.
Well, that's why I wanted to pull this up on the screen so it doesn't look like we're a bunch of idiots. No, they're times a fucking bunch of idiots. Okay. I feel like a certain other YouTuber that reads news articles. Okay, so for Trump and his allies that were running their own campaign to spoil the election, the president spent months insisting that mail-in ballots were a Democratic plot and the election would be, quote, rigged.
Where's the lie?
Where's the lie? His henchmen at the state level sought to block their use, while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious suits to make it more difficult to vote, an intensification of the GOP's legacy of suppressive tactics. Was it
other elections illegitimate because we didn't have massive mail-in voting before?
Yeah, who set up Jim Crow laws and poll taxes? Was that the Republicans?
It's actually the Democrats.
Oh gosh, darn snap. So you also saw a lot of those F graphs where we have all seen the F graphs from Wisconsin and then also from Georgia, where it's the totals over time throughout the night of election night, and they're both going up steady, and the Republicans are up a little bit, and then just in a snap, Joe Biden or the Democrats just go straight up and they jump over where the Republican line is, and then they continue their like soft curve, and so it creates this F-shaped graph. Well, that F-shaped graph is obviously indicative of something fishy going on. Those are in those happened in cities, in heavily minority areas. And so the Democrats want to talk about suppressing the votes. The place where we were looking for vote manipulation was in mostly just, by coincidence, I guess, was mostly in minority areas. So to the extent that I think a lot of people think that there was some funny business going on with the votes, if you're doing these weird F graphs because you're finding, 200,000 votes for the Democrats and 1 vote for Trump in a certain district, if that ends up being actual fraud, then the suppressed vote was actually against the minorities again. So the Democrats are just it's okay when they do it, right? All right. So before
one quick thing, we have the infidel saying, "I hope the Republican Party is dead. They showed zero support for the people they claim to represent, even stabbing them in the back." Now, here's what I think. There's 2 ways this may go, because there's obviously been a schism between the elitist and the populist in the GOP right now. I think it's clear as day, right? And I think that the elite still have a lot of the power and control over the apparatus of the party, the actual funding of the party. So there's 2 ways this could go. Either the populist side of the GOP could, through us voting for the right individuals and supporting financially the right individuals who actually are populists, could take over the party, or they might start their own, which would be the more risky but possibly better path.
I don't see anything. I think that it's over. I think this is just Democrat future for the next 50 years. And the reason why is because it doesn't matter what we do. For some reason, Republicans just cannot, or conservatives just cannot get off their fucking asses and go vote. We saw this in Virginia last year, where you had they basically almost completely lost all of their rights to guns. They almost completely destroyed the Second Amendment because in their off-year election for their state Senate, their state House, you had 600,000 Republicans come out, when just 2 years prior for Trump, you had 4 million. And they just left all those votes on the table, and they ended up losing their House, and then they ended up almost losing all of their gun rights.
And even if they do vote right now, it probably won't even matter.
Well, why? Why would you say that?
Because look what they did to this last election. They've shown their cards that they can, unless you overwhelmingly win, they will use fraud to make sure you lose. Your vote, that this election definitely implies your vote doesn't count. So I mean,
well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, is that like, what are you saying? Are you saying that we shouldn't are you saying that we shouldn't vote then?
No, you absolutely should vote.
Well, yeah, but like you say that, the whole point of the diatribe you just interrupted was that like the Republicans can't get off their fucking asses to go vote, and you're like, yeah, but like, why should they? Because it doesn't matter.
No, we still need to vote, but we need people who actually are going to fix the structural problems right now we have.
Yes, but you're never gonna get these non-establishment Republicans. That's where I was going with this. Is, well, one, we're not going to beat the Democrats, and we're also never going to get populist, non-establishment Republicans. They're never going to be able to win because you're never going to get people to vote. You're not going to get the conservatives out to vote. If somebody can prove me wrong on that, that'd be great. But we've seen it even as recently as Georgia, where you had a whole bunch of people that just didn't come out to vote, and then we very narrowly lost the Senate. Now, the funny business going on with stuff, but it's not everywhere, and it doesn't change the fact that you just have I don't think that the 4 million people that voted for Trump in Virginia in 2016 dropping to 600,000 voting in 2018. I don't think that the Democrats just deleted 3.5 million votes. So I like, it doesn't, like, you just have to get out to vote. Like, that doesn't change anything about what I was saying. It's just, for whatever reason, conservatives don't feel like getting out to vote. That's why we say all the time on the show, your local elections matter. If you guys are having city elections, vote. If you're having county elections, vote. If you're having a state election, vote. The federal election is one of the most meaningless, because what we're actually seeing right now is even though Biden's going crazy in the White House right now, and the Senate and the Supreme Court, or the Senate and the House are about to go crazy too. You're starting to see some states, because the Republicans picked up a lot of state houses, a lot more seats in them. You're starting to see some talk about legislation about being able to block stuff from the federal level, which will hopefully be able to tie up the federal government during the next 4 years, or at least during the next 2 years of the Republican-controlled Congress. But if we can't get out to vote and keep some of those states, if we can't flip some of these other blue states, the state governments to red, we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to get a populace to beat out Mitch McConnell in Kentucky if nobody in Kentucky ever goes out to vote. You're never going to get somebody to overthrow Ted Cruz. You got Ted Cruz who's out there, who's super popular, and you got everybody in his district, I'm sure, is just, I guess I'll just pull the lever for Ted because he's a well-known name and he's got a podcast and he does a lot of books and all that stuff. But you never get somebody in there who would actually do something. You got all of these rhino Republicans in the Senate and in the House who are just doing all this nut stuff. And the reason why is because same thing that Nancy said on her side. They've got a lot of districts where if you just put a glass of water with a D on it, it'll win. You got a lot of districts where if you just put an R on a glass of water, it'll win too. And until that changes, we're just boned. And I don't see, there's not been anything that indicates that that's going to change. Everybody's super excited to go to a protest and do open carry, but they weren't interested in going out to vote.
That's a wrong priority right there. I think you're right that the real answer here is getting out to vote, but I think you're going to have more of an effect at your local level. You have a much bigger effect of changing the politics of your area and the laws here by voting locally and going to make sure you go to those midterms. I think that federally, what they put in place is going to make it very hard for Republicans to get federal control again.
Well, yeah, and now we've gotten to the point where, because of one race in Georgia, now the Democrats are proposing legislation that would make it essentially illegal to have voter ID laws at the state and city level, which is a massive overreach by the federal government, but we'll see where that goes. But if Georgians had just got out to vote, it'd been fine. We saw that there was an undervote in Georgia as compared to the presidential election just a few weeks earlier, and I just don't understand what is so goddamn hard about it, especially now that you can just mail your vote in.
Yeah, so I can throw it away for you.
Yeah, exactly. But no, that's got to be the solution. We got all these issues. A lot of these issues are with the actual election officials. Well, your actual election officials are selected at the city level and the county level. Well, how do you affect that? Well, you vote in your city and county elections. You make sure that you're voting for your mayor. You make sure that you're voting for your county commissioners, and even fucking call them. Go look up whoever. If you were in a district where there was weird stuff going on with your election, go look up your people. Go look up your county commissioner and make sure you figure out when the next election is and vote them out and find somebody else who's going to be running for that. That's somebody that you want. That's good and populous. But if we just don't, everybody's just got this put it in cruise control and just put your hands up in the air. And if it happens to go awry, well, no big deal. I'll just go strap my gun on and go parade around in front of the Capitol building for a few hours, and that should solve everything.
This is way less effective.
Yeah,
marching around with a gun is not not the most effective way of using your time.
No, I mean, you spent 10 hours doing that. You could have spent 1 hour going to vote.
If that.
Yep.
All right, where are we at?
I don't know. Let's see here. So Trump plotted to block a legitimate vote count. He spent months following November 3rd, trying to steal the. He spent 2 months. He spent the months following November 3rd trying to steal the election he'd lost with lawsuits and conspiracy theories, pressure on the state and local officials, and finally summoning his army of supporters to the January 6th rally that ended in the deadly violence at the Capitol. So let's see here. There's a couple of things in here. So they said that Trump was he was trying to steal it with conspiracy theories. Let me scroll back up to the beginning of this.
This is an article about a conspiracy.
Yeah, where did they? I know I saw it in here. Conspiracy. Yes, here. Okay. In a way, Trump was right. There was a conspiracy. But it's bad when Trump says, when he has a conspiracy theory, he has a theory about the conspiracy. And yeah, like theory gets such a bad rap. Like it's a perfectly fine word. Like Trump, he noticed that there was a bunch of hallmarks of a conspiracy, so he theorized about that conspiracy. And now Time is saying, well, actually there was a conspiracy. And so Trump's theory, they shouldn't be saying that it's a theory. It was a theory at the time. Trump had a conspiracy theory at the time, but now we know it was just Trump had a conspiracy fact that he found. He found a conspiracy.
This article is confirming the conspiracy that they're saying that Trump was talking about. They're just framing that conspiracy as though they are the heroes, that they are correct. It is still a conspiracy. They're just justifying it. So Trump is right. And they're trying to imply he was crazy by suggesting the same thing this article is confirming. This is insane.
Then we have the deadly violence at the Capitol. Okay, so we had...
Who died at the
What's
Capitol?
that? Huh?
Who died at the Capitol?
Okay, so we had... I don't suppose you have that list.
No, but only one person was killed directly at the Capitol, right? It was,
okay, so
Hannah, who was
we had
shot.
5 people. So the reporting is the story has become, even Ted Cruz as recently as Thursday was saying 5 people died as a result of the Capitol riot. So what's true about that is that 5 people died in DC that day. What's false about that is that 5 people died as a direct result of the violence at the Capitol. So one person that did die for sure as a result of that was the Air Force veteran who was poking her head into a window that should not have been poking her head into, and then she got shot by Capitol Police and died. Then you had, so that was definitely for sure a confirmed death as a result of the violence, but that was the Capitol Police shooting the rioters. So
Ashley Babbitt.
So then you had you had somebody who died of a heart attack in the morning. Before any of this happened. You had somebody else who died of a stroke before any of this happened. And then you had an officer that was... The story was that the officer had been bludgeoned in the head with a fire extinguisher until he died. That never happened. So that was news to a lot of people this week when we found out that actually never happened, because that's just been part of the story for almost a full month now. And actually, that officer that was stated to have died as a result of being bludgeoned in the head was actually not bludgeoned in the head by a fire extinguisher. And he, after the events, said he's got text messages to his friends and family like, yeah, I'm fine. I got bear maced, but, I'm fine otherwise. And then he died of a stroke later the next day. It was almost the full day after. And then they were trying to say that, well, maybe it was a result of, he had a allergic reaction to the bear mace or something, but that really just doesn't make sense. And then I believe there was another another handful of officers that they were trying to include in this that had committed suicide 2 to 3 days after the Capitol riot. Now that's a very serious thing. It sucks they were going through whatever they were going through, but that's like somebody who commits suicide 3 days after an event. I really don't think you can say like that event, they like died in the event. Like
it's not fair to blame the event and the actions that took place at the event for those deaths. And it's also not fair to blame the acts of the rioters for the death of an unarmed person being shot by a security guard who shot a person when it was not necessary. That is actually bad on the other side. It's bad on the security forces. So it's not that the riot caused that. It happened because of negligence, and you can't. Not that this is in any way like we're trying to defend Trump, because this whole thing didn't happen because of Trump at all. It is they're trying to make the event even worse than it was by trying to pile on deaths that were not result of the actual event. And what the thing is, they do not do this for the BLM riots. They do not dare to go into all the extra deaths that happened as a tertiary to the actual BLM riots. They cover like 40 deaths that were direct results. Someone was shot by a BLM person, or someone was burned down.
You can try to bend over backwards and say that somebody having a heart attack at 9 a.m. is related to a riot that happened at 2 p.m. But when I'm talking about the Chaz and the 3 black kids that Antifa executed by shooting over 100 bullets into their SUV, I don't really need to stretch to say that was directly related to Antifa taking over Chaz. I don't have to bend over backwards at all for that.
Part of the problem is the hypocrisy of it, right? Like, they don't ever talk about all the rapes, the deaths, the lost jobs, incomes, people who are now having trouble feeding their families because the place where they worked was burned down. They don't cover all that human suffering that they funded, they supported, they encouraged. But then they have to stretch.
Be gone from me, you soy boy beta cock. The transaction is complete.
I still don't have anything to say here.
Well, that's all right. Thank you very much for the $20, Infidel. Much appreciated.
They have to bend over backwards to try to add deaths to this event, when really none of the deaths that they are listing are actually a result of the rioters going into the Capitol. They are all caused by other circumstances or negligence of not the rioters. Not saying that they should have gone into the Capitol, not saying they should have caused the damage they did, not saying that was good. It was all wrong, but they're trying to make it sound worse just to build a case about how they're trying to make us feel like this was almost an actual insurrection that would have overthrown the government, when it really was not that.
Yeah, and so you run into a situation where, like, it's bad, everybody can agree that it was bad, and the Democrats try to, like, make it worse, and they try to say, okay, well, everybody else is saying it's bad, so we're going to try and say that it was extra bad. And if you say, well, it wasn't that bad, they're saying, like, are you defending the riot? Like,
if you dare to report what actually happened, you're a white nationalist. But people who portray themselves as journalists are actually just peddling a narrative. They're taking elements of the truth and then adding in their narrative in which way where the truth actually supports their narrative. What the goal is for them is not to report what happened, it is to push a narrative. And they only show you what happened in what way it supports their narrative.
Yep. All right. Let's see. I will just skip to this quote here. So, every week we felt like we were struggling to try to pull off this election without the country going through a real dangerous moment of unraveling, says a former GOP representative, Zach Wamp, a Trump supporter who helped coordinate a bipartisan election protection council. We can look back on this. We can look back and say this thing went pretty well, but it was not at all clear in September and October that was going to be the case. And again, why would anybody think that there would be violence when there was violence all summer?
This shows that Zach Wamp was effectively intimidated by the violence from the left. They were able to get people to work against our country, to be traitors to our country, because they were afraid that the left might commit more acts of violence. Because it was not Trump supporters that was burning down our country. It was the Biden supporters.
Alrighty, so then we have, kind of related to this, we have a story about the military purge, which is something we're going to cover. So, do you want me to read this part, or were you going to read this?
I'm going to read it. We're just going to go kind of in generalities here. So another thing that's going on right now is that Biden has replaced people inside the highest levels of the military, the DOD, both in the civilian and military side. He's replaced them with loyalists who are have some of the very radical ideas about controlling the military and their loyalties. So a newly confirmed Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin, has ordered a nationwide, a military-wide stand down to allow for, quote, needed discussions between local commanders and their soldiers about right-wing extremism within their ranks. Details of the stand down, an event wherein military members pause normal operations to convene and talk about a topic, are yet to be announced. Beyond that, it will happen within the next 60 days. So basically, how this works is they're going to release a general statement. Then higher level leadership will have working groups where they'll discuss how to be a little more direct, a little more specific in their directives to lower level commanders about what they want discussed. They will then give those directives to lower level commanders, and then we're talking battalion and squadron commanders now, wing commanders, group, and so on. And then they will have an event, possibly one or a few days, where they will have discussions, small group discussions, big briefings with their troops about the topic. This will coincide with those units having to provide a corrective action that they're going to use is to help towards the effort of preventing this kind of thing. Their corrective action could be a way of providing their troops an IG phone line to call to report possible risks, right? So one example of this already happened in some branches of the military where they put out a directive saying, hey, it is already a requirement as members of the military with security clearances, which is the vast majority of the military, they have some level of security clearance, even a low level, that if you commit a crime, that you are supposed to report your crime to the people who manage your security clearance, and if you don't, there's additional military punishment for not reporting your crime. So there's the civilian punishment for committing the crime itself, and then additional penalties that are not double jeopardy for not reporting it immediately. Also, you are required to report known crimes of other members that you know have a security clearance, even if they got away with it. So if a member were to commit a crime and you know they did it, and you have evidence to that fact, and the police did not catch them, it's your duty as a person with security clearance to report that incident. This is said within the context of no matter what ideology it is, even though you're allowed to protest, you're not allowed to commit crimes while protesting. So this seems reasonable on its head. Now, what this can be used for, and what I think that this could be a step towards creating the groundwork for, is that they want to weed out people from the military who would be ideologically opposed to Biden's presidency. And this is a dangerous step, and it's really how it takes effect is kind of down to how lower level commanders actually enact it. I know that some leaders would not dare out their troops because they are part of what's a non-militant conservative group? Turning Point USA.
Yes.
Wouldn't say, oh, this guy is a possible white supremacist because he's part of Turning Point USA. Most people in the military, I don't think, would do that, right? But it's possible that if you create this system, that it could be used, it could be abused to try to claim people who are conservative are doing things illegally when they haven't. It could be used to kind of having a reverse Red Scare, right? Where you have a ability to have people who don't like someone report them for possibly being a part of the Proud Boys, right?
Yeah.
So that's the concern. That's not what's happened yet. It doesn't, but it's definitely a possibility, and it's something we need to keep an eye open for.
So, other things that Dyer shouldn't be talking about. So I will definitely say this, and Dyer shouldn't comment on this. So Lloyd Austin, who Dyer just referenced, the Secretary of Defense, new appointee from Biden. His history is that he was up until like 2 weeks ago, was sitting on the board of Lockheed. And then his military service was overseeing the giant clusterfuck that was Iraq for like 5 or 6 years. So he's, and he's also black, which, as we know in the Biden administration, that's kind of the key thing, is like whether or not you're black. It doesn't really matter what else you're good at. It's just, are you black? Are you a woman? And that's about it. But Lloyd proves that the corruption of the military-industrial complex is not exclusively a white thing. So I'm glad that that's diversified as well.
I think I gave what I'm officially allowed to say. I described the process, described some concerns, but did not criticize the legitimacy of that military leader.
Moving on to our next story. Impeachment. I try to break your shovels before you dig the holes too deep. Alrighty, so what do we got on impeachment, Dyer? We got
several videos. So I want to start off with saying that the first day of we all know that impeachment is a complete sham, and that we don't need to go into point-by-point debunking of all the repetitive and false evidence that was provided.
It was frankly ridiculous and just a giant.
It was completely ridiculous. So we're not going to try to do that. We're just going to show you some highlights of stuff that I thought was particularly funny and poignant. But I do want to point out that the Trump's lawyers on the first day were really bad at making any kind of really good argument. But they did provide their actual arguments the next day better and a lot shorter. Like, they didn't use up all their time. Well, they did something we suggested, is they really shouldn't use up all the time to debunk stupid claims. They spent very little time, just a couple hours out of 16 hours available, to just do a little bit what we're going to show you here. We got some videos. The first video is of they played like 5 times. They played this video of the Democrats inciting violence and using the same language that they're saying that they're going to impeach Trump for. Let's watch that.
I suppose probably don't want to watch all 8 minutes of it, though, right?
And there's more.
Just give us a sample.
I promise to fight every single day. I'm a fighter and I'm relentless. But I'm a fighter and I'm relentless. A fighter and I'm relentless. I will fight like hell.
The way I see it now is that we pick ourselves up and we fight back. That's what I think it's all about. We stand up and we fight back. We do not back down. We do not compromise, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You can either lie down, you can whimper, you can pull up in a ball, you can decide to move to Canada, or you can stand your ground and fight back. And that's what it's about. We do fight back, but we are going to fight back. We are not turning this country over to what Donald Trump has sold. We are just not. Look, people in this fight all the way.
All my colleagues, this is the fight of our life.
Whose side are you on? Who are you fighting for?
They're fighting, or I'm fighting. We're both fighting.
We will fight back. We're not going to just take this line down.
I'm just going to keep the fight up.
What we have to do right now is fight as hard as we can.
Getting people engaged in the fight. We're fighting. We've got to keep fighting and keep focused. Continue to fight.
Fight. This is going to be a fight.
We'll also fight him and challenge.
We always must fight. Joe Biden has a deep, deep-seated commitment to fight and to fight and about the importance.
Progressive change. As a lawyer who fought for should fight.
And because my constituents send me here each and every day to fight.
Okay, so there's 8 minutes of this basically showing every person on the Democrat side and the impeachment managers themselves in the previous day using the word fight over and over again when they claim that Trump's use of the phrase that we need to fight like hell was the...
Oh, we're losing Dyer here. Dyer, can you hear me? I've lost Dyer. Well, Dyer said that he might be... Oh. Can you hear me, buddy? We appear to be having some technical difficulties. While we're waiting for Dyer to come... Yeah, F for Dyer. While we're waiting for Dyer to come back, we'll watch our next video here. But as Dyer was saying, yes, obviously, hypocrisy. It's just kind of. Yeah, nobody can hear you, Dyer. It's just so tiring talking about like the hypocrisy because like obviously the left just doesn't care about it, but you know they're trying to gin up this idea that like Trump's using very regular language that all politicians use and just trying to pretend that that's suddenly like inciting violence, inciting riots. And you know it's just the same. It's obviously it's so common that all the Democrats use it. They used it that day and the day before. It's just common political parlance. And nobody up until that moment thought that saying "fight like hell" that was going to be a problem.
Ingenuous. So this next video, they took some time to actually show the Charlottesville lie that they brought up multiple times when saying that Trump was inciting violence by calling white supremacists good people. Here, can you play that video real quick?
This lie traveled around the world a few times, made its way into the Biden campaign talking points, and ended up on the Senate floor. The Charlottesville lie. Very fine people on both sides, except that isn't all he said. And they knew it then, and they know it now. Watch this.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry, I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly? No, I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. I'm sure in that group there were some bad ones. The following day it looked like they had some rough, bad people, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, whatever you want to call them. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this, there are two sides to a story. I thought what took place was a horrible moment for our country, a horrible moment. But there are two sides to the country. Does anybody have a...
Does that sound inciting to you?
No. Well, and that's also, again, you hear him say, you know, not talking about the Nazis and white supremacists. When you got groups where like a lot of people are mixed in there, and the media just wants to pretend that it's all one group.
You also forget that
no nuance to it.
The white nationalist group that actually were using the Tiki Torches, they actually had gone out and they had tried to get other conservative groups. They had what's the word? They had lobbied other conservative groups to join them for a big event. So they actually had a whole bunch of conservative groups who didn't really know the people who were organizing it, and they showed up there to protest. And then the people who had organized it were a small group of racists who had their goals and were trying to swell their numbers.
That's all. Like that's not like. That's not important to like this. Like that's just we were just showing that just to like show like okay like they said Trump said a thing and they just clipped out this teeny tiny part of it just to like get the specific wording down, and there's all this context they're like very intentionally leaving out.
But there was the pictures he was referring to was there's pictures of these different groups that were just protesting. They left, and the Tiki Torture guys kept going, right?
Yeah,
it was different. But they completely removed the context of the situation and just completely lie about what he said by taking out his most of his words.
Yes. You look at that kind of video up against what Biden talking about how he was purposely going to withhold $1 billion of taxpayer money, which he's not allowed to do unless they fired the prosecutor that was going after his son. And we see Biden on tape explaining this in detail, explaining his thought process, explaining his excitement at being able to power play like that. We see all of that on tape, and the media will just say, like, that didn't happen. That's not what he's talking about. And then they'll have Trump who's saying, he'll give a specific sentence and say, okay, other than the white nationalists and the Nazis, I think all the regular people that were there, there's very fine Americans on both sides, and they'll just clip out real tiny parts of that and try and say, okay, he said something completely different that he didn't say at all. And so they'll find stuff that Trump didn't say in his speeches, and then stuff that Biden actually says, they'll just forget about it immediately.
So they also talked about how the impeachment managers had doctored multiple pieces of evidence. And I do like how the Trump's lawyers are like, hey, usually when there's a court case and the prosecutors are found to have doctored evidence, the court case is over. You've lost. You had to falsify evidence to try to make a claim.
Well, also, if it's in federal court too, I think it's like a crime too.
It is a crime, yeah. Now you're the one on trial. Yeah. So a couple of things that were doctored was they added a blue check mark to a tweet to try to make it seem more legitimate. Which is hilarious to me that they had to do that in their mind. And then they also hilariously edited Trump's speech to make it seem like he was saying something that he didn't say. It's like really bad jump cuts showing that a lot of context was cut out. Let's go into the next video about the doctoring of evidence.
Given the allegations of the House manager that President Trump has tolerated anti-Semitic rhetoric, has there been a more pro-Israel president than President Trump?
No, but it's apparent that nobody listened to what I said earlier today because the victorial speech needs to stop. You need to stop. There was nothing fun here, Mr. Raskin. We aren't having fun here. This is about the most miserable experience I've had down here in Washington, D.C. There's nothing fun about it. And in Philadelphia, where I come from, when you get caught doctoring the evidence, your case is over. And that's what happened. They got caught doctoring the evidence, and this case should be over.
Does this other video have some of the evidence in it? You there, Dyer? Dyer apparently has left the building. Okay, well, I was hoping that video would show some of the doctored evidence. We'll see if... Okay, I think Hannity's got it. We'll watch what Hannity's
remarks.
got.
Watch for yourself.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down to the Capitol. But I think right here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, and we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. Lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Now, as you could see, not only did the Democrats selectively edit the president's speech, they also manipulated key evidence, pieces of evidence, and they frequently relied on, guess what? Well, their best friends, sketchy news reports, and rumor to make their case. That would never fly in any court of law. Take a look.
According to those around him at the time, reportedly responded.
Trump reportedly reports across all major media outlets, major news networks, including Fox News, reportedly summoned.
That's enough.
Reportedly.
My goodness.
Yeah, they use a lot of news articles that had reported falsehoods as their evidence.
Well, I hope that during the Biden impeachment that Direwolf Media gets a shout out as having reported that Joe Biden is a very bad man and he sniffs children and is probably...
He does sniff children. I would never let him anywhere near my kids.
Reported.
So, as of today, Trump was found innocent with a vote of 57 to 43 in the Senate. That's 57 votes in favor of convicting him and 43 against. However, you need to have 67 votes in favor to actually convict someone.
Okay. So
yes.
Okay, I thought that. Okay, I was misreading that earlier. So okay, yeah. So we had 7.
I knew it sounds.
We had
wrong.
7
I knew everyone's gonna get that
defector.
wrong.
What's that?
I knew everyone was gonna get that wrong.
Yeah. So we had 7 defector Republicans that voted to convict Trump over all of this evidence.
Right. So I want to make sure that you already their names earlier. I lost you for a little bit.
Yeah, you just
if
like
not,
cut out. I don't know what happened. All right. So the 7 GOP members are Richard M. Burr of North Carolina, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Mitt Romney of Utah, Ben Sasse of Nebraska, and Patrick J. Toomey of Pennsylvania. If those,
I've heard all these names many times before, and as have you on previous stories.
Yeah.
And basically, anytime the GOP has done something bad, they've had their names on it. This is part of these are some of the elitist in the Republican Party.
So, if those are your senators, you should give them a call or support their primary challenge. You
should definitely fight against them,
Yes.
by voting.
Yeah, and how do you get them out of there? Is you have to have an entire state of Republicans that are not idiots, just checking the R. They have to look at who the primary challengers are. They have to vote in the primary. That's one thing that we also don't do very often, is people just don't go out to the primary votes. And if you don't go out to the primary votes, then there's never a chance to change who's on the main ballot at the actual election. So if you're in these states, you really gotta focus on those primaries for the Senate and for Congress. So, but
what does vote?
I just haven't seen any evidence that at any point in time there's anything that's going to get Republicans to come out to vote for anything. They just refuse to do it. Trump got people out to vote, but it wasn't enough. And it was for an election that, again, it's an important election, but not the most important election, or it's at least it doesn't matter if it's not important if we don't win the other elections. And
maybe when it hurts enough, they will change. Maybe when it starts hurting enough. It's not something that we want to be imposed, but it is a consequence of your own actions. There is a immediate result that is punishing you. So what this vote of the 7 GOP members, what it means is they don't care about the truth, because obviously what was presented was ridiculous. They are the premise for which they're impeaching Trump is completely ridiculous. What they're doing is saying, if you oppose the establishment, you oppose their power, if you are not on their side, they will try to destroy you. And this is not over. The attacks against Trump does not stop with impeachment, the attempted known failure. They're going to continue trying to persecute him, to try to victimize him, because they hate him for having challenged their power. Well, I do not envy him.
And you also, too, I mean, to a certain extent, they're just also, it sounds kind of maybe a little lowbrow to just frame it like this, but they're also dumb. I bet you if you go back through these 7 GOP senators, I bet you if you quizzed them on a lot of the things that we know that are false, I bet you that they would think that they were true. I bet you that they think 5 to 7 people died in the Capitol and were killed by the Trump rioters that they think. I bet you they think that Trump said very fine people. I bet you they think that there was people hunting down AOC 90 minutes before anybody breached the Capitol.
It wasn't people. It was Ted Cruz.
Yes, it was
Ted Bundy.
Ted Cruz was chasing her down to rape her.
Yes,
it's like, no, come on, Ted Cruz doesn't have time for that. He's got podcasts and books.
He's gonna write a book about it.
Yeah. Yeah, Jesus Christ. But you ask him any of this stuff. You ask him about, how many lawsuits did Trump actually launch? I bet you they think it's 50 or 60 when we know that it was only 3 or 4, and those other ones were launched by individuals in various states. It wasn't launched by the Trump campaign. I bet you ask him about just various things about QAnon and whether or not that's a Trump thing. I bet you if you ask them about certain things that happened during the riots over the summer, or ask them about what they thought about George Floyd or what happened to Kyle Rittenhouse, I bet you they get all of that wrong, because these people, these senators, they're not any smarter than anyone else, and they're just getting all of the same garbage media stuff that we are making fun of on a weekly basis here. But they actually take that uncritically and just take it as, oh, that must be the truth. We really, realistically, I think the thing that might save the country is if more Congress and senators relied on alt media, relied on YouTubers or podcasters or other people that weren't mainstream media. I really think that's the only way that they would actually get a correct balance of information. Because I think that the only way that you can vote for impeachment is if you are fully committed to what the mainstream media narrative is. And it's just completely false.
These individuals also are simultaneously very short-sighted and also have a short memory. Because Mitt Romney, you remember when he ran, how horribly they treated him, all of the things they said about him. They treated him like they treated Trump to some degree, maybe half of the intensity, calling him a white nationalist, Nazi, woman abuser, chauvinist, and all the other isms. And
it's funny. One of the things they really attacked him on was that Bain Capital that he worked for that purposefully would collapse companies to try to make money off of their collapse. And they said that he was so evil for doing that. And I agree with that to a large extent. But the media ripped him apart, saying like, oh, he's just evil trying to destroy jobs. And that was actually true at the time. But
true.
But then you look at a couple of weeks ago where you've got Marvin Capital trying to destroy GameStop. And a bunch of regular people on Reddit decide, no, we're going to stop that, and we're not going to let you destroy a whole company. And all of a sudden, stopping a company from being destroyed, you're the bad guys. The people destroying the company, they're the good guys in the story. Even though when Mitt Romney was doing it, it wasn't okay. But because Melvin Capital, they donate a lot to the Democrats. It's okay when they do it.
It's about tribe, Fox, not about reality.
Yeah,
or morals or principles.
Yeah. All right. Well.
Yeah. So the point is that all of those Republicans that voted for impeachment, they've all both been victims of the Democrat lies in the past, and they will be in the future when they have more power. So it's very short-sighted and stupid for them to buy into it and attack Trump and support the people who want to destroy them as well. They're just not currently in the crosshairs, but they're still targets.
Well, get them primaried out. If you live in those states, you better vote. All righty. Yep. Well, our next story is about somebody who also got stuck in the mainstream media narrative. So we have Gina Carano was fired from Disney and Disney Plus. Very sad. So Gina was fired from the popular Disney Plus TV series The Mandalorian for her opposition of political violence. She doesn't like when governments.
How dare she? That's a very white supremacist idea of her.
Yeah, so this was her tweet. Quote, "The Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where the Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first had to make their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is it that any different from hating someone for their political views?
I said the same thing like last show.
Yeah, and so hearing that it was bad for the Nazi government to make their neighbors hate each other, the left said, "Are you personally attacking us?"
That they saw themselves in that description of the Nazis says so much.
Yes.
People who are praising her canceling say that the minimizing of that she was minimizing the Nazis. This is coming from the same people who are calling Trump supporters Nazis for supporting free speech. The only thing they've done is support free speech, and they say you're a Nazi. Is that not minimizing what it is to be a Nazi? And
Yes.
I would say that her comment saying that political violence and a campaign of hate to make the populace hate a certain group to then justify violence against them is very relatable to what Antifa, BLM, and the Democrats have done. They are encouraging punch a Nazi and then calling people who just are white and in the wrong place at the wrong time a Nazi. That they are doing exactly the same thing. I think the problem is that they didn't like that it was the minimizing of the Nazis. They didn't like how accurate her statement was. That was the problem. Meanwhile, this is Disney firing her for.
Hold on a second. So did you hear about this LA Times article last week about this journalist? She was complaining about her neighbor snowblowing her driveway without having been asked. And so she was saying that he was a MAGA supporter, a Trump supporter, and that he had shoveled her driveway without her having asked him to do it, just because he's a kind guy. And so she was like overly analyzing, like, well, he was just doing that because like that's what white people do for each other, and that's really similar to how the jihadis and like Al Qaeda, they do stuff for each other too, presumably because they're also white supremacists. And so she was trying
things for each other because we were Americans, had some camaraderie.
Yeah, so this act of kindness from her neighbor who happened to be a Trump supporter, she's trying to liken it to be a something like jihad or like terrorism, and saying that it's white supremacy that he would give her a gift for free just because she was white. Like that, she had all of these crazy assumptions about it. And you compare that to what Gina's tweet is, that they had to get the neighbors to hate each other before the government could come in and round them up. And then you see that synchronizing, completely unrelated to this, but just synchronizing in the culture and in the timeline. You've got LA Times journalist talking about how they viscerally hate their neighbor because they did something nice for them, and they're trying to figure out if that's like some kind of a white supremacist thing. And
I don't know if I said this.
What's that?
I don't know if I said this in the show, but I think I talked with you about it. How one aspect of being in a cult is that they teach you that the people outside the cult are wrong and evil and can't be trusted, and that you need to keep separate from them. And they try to make you separate from people in your life that are not part of the cult to avoid you having being influenced by them. And it often results in people who've joined a cult, breaking off connections and hating people, and then they look for justifications to support that hatred. They first have it without a reason, and then look for a way to support that, like try to find a reason for why their hate is justified, because they want to be the good guy in their own story, right? At all times. You don't want the point of the cult isn't to make it look like you are someone who's victimizing other people. You have to believe that you are the one who's being victimized, and that those people are not trustworthy, those people are evil, and then to justify that, your mind looks for reasons, even though they're ridiculous, to support your hatred of them, because their actions aren't reflecting what you believe about them. So you look for reasons that would support it.
Yeah. So I bring up that article just because they want to pretend like Gina's saying this in a vacuum, that, she's just spouting out this like Nazi rhetoric and stuff like that. Like, no. She's saying this in response to what the current environment is. And the current environment is that the LA Times is extremely comfortable letting one of their journalists write an op-ed about how they viscerally hate their neighbor as a white supremacist for having plowed their driveway. That is the environment. Like, that is the environment that we're in right now. And like all the rest of us, Carrero has noticed that and identified that, and she's looking through history, as we often do, for similar things that have happened in history to see where this goes next. Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it. And so, yeah, maybe it's a little bit tropish at this point to reference the Nazis, but certainly it was a unique point in history at that time. And looking back on it as frequently as we do, just as a society, that's somewhat in a way of trying to do the never forget so that we never repeat it. And she's identified a specific thing that the Nazis were doing in a lead up to what eventually would happen in the late 30s and 40s. This hating your neighbor thing is what happened to get to that point. And like I said, we have a culture in which it is extremely comfortable for mainstream media to put out articles specifically talking about how they hate their neighbors just for their political ideology.
I also find it kind of humorous that the left couldn't stand that there was a strong, independent, confident woman who was willing to give her opinion about something.
Right? Like, how dare she?
And so that she must be destroyed and canceled. You don't fit the mold. You can only support ideas that we say you can support. Otherwise,
who was it? Was it one of the squad members? I can't remember which one, but they were saying you need to be a woman's voice in a woman's body. Like, if you don't have if you don't have a gay voice and like you can't speak for that, or if you don't have a woman's voice and you can't speak for the women, if you don't have a black voice and you can't speak for black people, like there was like a skin color, and you had to have a certain way that you talked and a certain ideology that you had, otherwise you didn't count as being a part of that group. And so Carrero is a strong, independent woman, and she's not, she doesn't fit that mold. She might have a woman's body, but she doesn't have a woman's voice because she's being independent and not going along with the flock.
Right, and that was one of the bricks in the wall that they're building, moving from the narrative of the oppressed peoples in society to being it is the ideology versus ideology. Doesn't really matter. We're the mass is slipping. It's no longer any kind of preconceived notion. It's about protecting women and minority groups. It's basically gone. It's you have to be part of our belief system. Otherwise, you must be destroyed. Everything else is just a facade. So meanwhile, this is Disney firing her, right? For minimizing Nazism, apparently. For being a white supremacist. But the same company, Disney, credited the Chinese government organizations that are operating concentration camps for Uyghurs. And they credited these organizations in the movie Mulan because those organizations used their property as places where they filmed the movie. So they thanked the organizations that are literally putting people in concentration camps, stealing their organs, and killing people. Disney's willing to do that, but not willing to have her speak her mind. Also, Gina's co-star, Pedro Pascal, who plays the Mandalorian character in the same TV show, previously tweeted a meme comparing Trump supporters to the South in the Civil War and Nazis. Is that not minimizing Nazism in the same way, though it's completely inaccurate? His is even more offensive, you could say, than what she said, because hers was actually accurate, and Pascal is saying that 72 million Americans are basically Nazis. Also, comically, if you go over, I believe, the next slide, we'll have to come back to this, though. Yes, you see that picture there? See, Pascal also tweeted out this hilarious meme where the picture of Jews in Germany in a concentration camp, not the funny part, in 1944, and then compared it to this picture he says is in America in 2018, right? Actually, that picture is in Palestine with kids that are Palestinian, and they actually had a propaganda picture where they're claiming this was in Israel when it wasn't. So it was a lie from the beginning to try to discredit
Man, that
Israelis.
picture's gotten a lot of traction, hasn't it?
Right? And now he reused it as to say this was America, to say that America is putting kids in cages just like the Jews, essentially like Germany put Jews in camps. And this is completely idiotic and wrong, and yet he's allowed to put out hate like that towards the Trump and his supporters, but she can't say something completely normal and rational.
I don't know if I call that hateful. I just think it's like incoherent.
It is more incoherent. I was talking about the other slide for being hateful.
Oh yeah.
But,
so then we got Jack Morsey, a film producer for Disney, who famously tweeted during the Covington situation that he wanted to put the Covington kids into a wood chipper for smiling. And he didn't just go so far as to say it. He also drew a picture of it. It's very nice.
Yeah, he put a lot of effort into showing what his disdain for people who dare be white and smile at the same time. You must be sad if you are white.
Yeah. Now, so again, this is a situation where I think it's interesting, kind of the theme of this section, because we have a few other like quick just highlights of other stories to attach onto this. But kind of the theme that we were starting here is just, she was describing what the Nazis did that was bad, and it's just objectively true that the Nazis did these things and that it was bad for them to do it, and that it set the stage for what they would go on to do later. And she's just describing this accurately. And then she goes on to say, I feel like this might be happening in America, and I'm concerned about it. And the Democrats are just highly offended by it. They're just highly offended that she would think that replicating what the Nazis are doing is a bad thing. And again, like I said, we had that article from the LA Times about hating their Trump neighbor because he plowed their lawn or plowed their driveway. We have like a one-to-one connection within a week of what Carrero was saying was happening, and then the media reporting like, yes, we do in fact hate our neighbors, and we're encouraging other people to hate their neighbors as well. Again, just seeing the left seeing themselves in the Nazis and being offended that Carrero doesn't like what the Nazis were doing, and the left taking offense. Nobody, like, it was completely unneeded self-own for the left to take offense. For Disney took offense that she doesn't like Nazis. We had there's a few other stories that we've had kind of related to this, just kind of in the theme of it. So there is people started looking into other people that Disney has kept on, while they were getting rid of her for this very, I think very tepid tweet.
Accurate.
Yes, tepid and accurate. But you've got, this guy, this Jack Morsey guy, still employed at Disney, even though he wanted to put children into a wood chipper. It was reported that Disney just rehired a producer who was previously fired after he was convicted, not just accused, he was convicted of pedophilia. He had previously worked at Disney as a producer on a children's show, working with children, while he was a pedophile. He was then convicted as a pedophile, and then Disney has recently rehired him, and he's going to be a producer again on a show that has children in it, like as a show that has children actors in it that he'll be in close contact with. So you see that sort of stuff, and then you wonder why. You also see the left just so terrified of QAnon, and you really wonder when you've got Disney hiring pedophiles, hiring convicted pedophiles to work with child actors. And you look at how scared they are of QAnon and how offended they are that one of the core conspiracy theories of QAnon is that the Democrats are a cabal of pedophiles. And it's like, well, I mean, where's the lie in that? And if if it's just a conspiracy theory, why are all the Democrats so offended and so terrified of QAnon? Now, again, there's a bunch of other weird stuff about QAnon, but like the idea, like one of the core ideas, is that there's a bunch of pedophiles throughout the mainstream media and in Hollywood and in the Democrat Party, and they're all they see themselves in this, and they're just like seeing themselves identifying with the Nazis and being offended when people don't like Nazis. They identify with the pedophiles, and they get so upset that there's a giant group of people out there that hate pedophiles. They're so offended by it.
We actually have a problem with QAnon being linked to the idea that there are a bunch of powerful Democrats who are pedophiles. Because QAnon is a lot more than that, and it actually dirties the water, because there's a lot of legitimacy to there being people in the Democrat Party and in the media who are passively allowing or even actively enabling powerful pedophiles.
Yes.
And like with Epstein not being outed when there was a journalist and an news organization that had evidence against him.
Yeah,
because
you had ABC. They had the story. They had the story for 2 years before he got charged with it.
The problem is that there's legitimate evidence. This is not just a conspiracy theory. There's literally evidence of this. QAnon dirties the waters because QAnon is a lot more than that, and they're using QAnon to discredit the ideas.
Yeah,
and that's why I don't like associating QAnon with that. QAnon is a conspiracy theorist group. I've had a guy who I work with who constantly brings me stuff from QAnon and says, "Hey, is this real?" I'm like, dude, come on, stop. There's no evidence for that.
I wasn't meaning to bring up I wasn't like, this wasn't like a discussion about QAnon. It was just like bringing up.
I know. I just wanted to that's been on my chest for a while. I wanted to bring it up that those are two separate things.
I know. But you also had more pedophiles. So the Lincoln Project. I think everybody's probably heard about the Lincoln Project so far. So the Lincoln Project, the last 4 years of Trump, there is a supposed Republicans gathering together to fight to resist Trump because they didn't think he was a real conservative or a real Republican. And it was, an organization entirely devoted to just smearing other Republicans. So it wasn't very Republican in origin, but they've basically evaporated this week. The organization is completely gone after their head leader was outed as a pretty prolific pedophile. He was using his position to try to pull in children and promising them internships and positions and getting them connections in the government. And then he was trading that for sex with kids as young as 14 and 13. And it was also discovered that the Lincoln Project, a lot of the people working in the Lincoln Project, they all knew about this. It was an open joke from their perspective for at least the last year, and it was an open secret for several years before that. A lot of people had known about that. So again, you just have this, you've got this idea of there is actually verified a lot of pedophiles on the left. There's a lot of them. And there's this group that, again, amongst the other things that they do, that doesn't like pedophiles, and the left is personally offended. They feel personally attacked because they identify with the pedophiles. And so, the whole theme of this is just that, the right, we have the moral high ground, and we can properly, correctly identify things that are evil. And when we identify them as evil, the left feels personally offended because they have no ability to figure out any kind of moral relativism.
Yeah. Why does the left get offended when you say, hey, these powerful pedophiles is bad? Like,
why are you attacking me?
Why are you attacking me? Nazis and political violence is bad. Why are you attacking me?
Yeah.
You're outing yourself right now. You understand that you actually are a part of these groups. You're doing these things.
Yeah,
it's not.
It's like if I asked you, I was like, hey, man, dude, Nazis suck, don't they? Like, my expectation is that you're just like, yeah, and then you agree with me. But if you're like, hey, man, stop attacking me, I'd be like, what are you talking about? Are you a Nazi? So basically, Disney and the left are Nazis and pedophiles. So, all right, moving on. Okay, well, no, the show's over forever, right? I mean, that's That's the kind of grand conclusion of Direwolf Media, is the left is Nazis and pedophiles.
I mean, there's nowhere to go from here.
Yeah,
We've already hit
no more
the
shows.
pinnacle
All
of
right,
the
see you
show.
guys. Direwolf Media's canceled.
Yeah, sorry. That was the entire. This actually was a show with a intended end. We were planning on ending up at this point at some point. I just thought it would take longer.
Yeah, it's the grand finale. Is that was the grand final declaration.
I should really have made more of a fanfare for it.
Yeah, I didn't, just snuck up on me. All right, well, we got a few more stories. Maybe we won't end it quite so quick. We'll do kind of an epilogue. We'll
just kind of muddle through. We didn't really have a plan, but we'll work it out.
Okay. All right. So our next story is the water supply in Tampa was hacked, sort of, and the water was poisoned with lye, which is, I mean, not lies, but lye. New York water was poisoned with lies. DC water is poisoned with lies.
Can I point out something?
What?
Every single story that talked about this mentioned a small city outside Tampa. When I pull up the fucking map, you can't tell the distinction between the city and Tampa.
Yeah, no, that's just like a suburb. It's like an indistinguishable suburb from like Tampa.
Yeah,
I bet you.
But a small city. It's super packed in. It's dense population there. What are you talking about? Small town.
Yeah, I mean, it's like saying like the Bronx is like a city, like near Manhattan. It's like a small city near Manhattan. But it's like,
I know this is quibbling, but like it bothered me that was the description.
All right, well, let's talk about the actual story, Dyer. All right, so around 1:30 p.m. on Friday, I think it was 2 Fridays ago, a plant operator at a water treatment facility in a town in Florida noticed his mouse dash around the screen on its own. A hacker had taken remote control of his workstation and clicked to open the software that controls the levels of sodium hydroxide, also known as lye, being used to treat the water. The hacker raised the levels of lye by more than 100 times what they were supposed to be, a hazardous level that could sicken residents and corrode the pipes.
Severely sicken, to the point of could kill.
Yeah, well, so lye is a base. Drano is also a base. And so the same reasons that you shouldn't drink Drano are the same reasons that you shouldn't drink a lot of lye. Bases are very good at dissolving your skin. They dissolve biological material very rapidly. Now, acids can do that too, but bases, like, they're specifically dangerous to biological material. That's why you use Drano, is because it's going to break up what it's assuming is a biological clog of some sort that's in your drains, like your hair or something like that. It's very good at dissolving that. And it doesn't do as much stuff to like pipes or something like that. But if you're drinking water with a lot of lye in it, you're basically drinking water that's got Drano in it.
Right. And usually the amount that's in there is a very tiny fraction. We're talking about, very just small
so
amounts.
The way the water treatment would work, what I'm assuming that they're doing with that is that they're probably using that as a pre-step that will kill stuff in the water, and then they're probably adding something else to it, like calcium, to deactivate the lye, so that they balance back out, and they would bind together and they would go out of the water, but all the germs and stuff like that would be dead. But if you
don't increase the other thing, then
if you don't increase the other thing to counteract it, then it's just going to stay in the water after the filter process, and then you're toast.
Right. So the operator was able to quickly fix the levels moments after the attack, and said that the situation that there was virtually no impact to the water supply based off of the very short moment that the levels were changed, because it would be diluted by all the other water that is going through. This situation, however, highlights yet again, out of a innumerable number of stories, some of which we've covered, some of which we've not covered, of the vulnerabilities of the American critical infrastructure, and how they're very soft targets right now that are very vulnerable, that need to be hardened. There needs to be a concerted effort to protect our critical infrastructure, because things like the water system being corrupted can cause mass death and disruption to all parts of life. the loss of power, the loss of public services, communication. There is an innumerable amount of death and disruption to our economy they can cause by the damage to this infrastructure, and they're very easy to damage. We've actually demonstrated how we've been able to do it to other countries who are adversaries, and some of the countries who are adversaries to us, but we're not in open warfare with, have the ability to shut down most, if not all, of our critical infrastructure. And we need to, knowing this, be hardening against that threat. A couple of examples would be SolarWinds was one recent hack where we learned that foreign adversaries had direct access to computer systems that control a lot of our critical infrastructure.
Yep.
You want to talk about
that? Yeah, so SolarWinds is a software, kind of an antivirus or server management software that runs on a lot of cloud computing services. It's estimated that something like 60 to 80% of all the servers in the world had SolarWinds products on it. And the SolarWinds hack was something that created a rogue update that updated all of those servers across the world to have this little bit of code in them that allowed anybody to gain full access to that server. That was something that was discovered late last year, but the problem was so deep that it's unknown if it was actually fixed, and it may not be fixable. It might just be something that we permanently live with.
Another recent example of how vulnerable we are right now, we had with Biden's weakening of the border, and which, by the way, he's made it basically impossible for us to actually detain any family groups coming across.
Yeah, did you hear about the verified first few criminals that were caught and released? So
yeah, I had.
Yeah, so there was we're starting to get some actual hard numbers, not just generalities now. Last week, after two different individuals, illegal immigrants, one of them had been deported multiple times. Another one had been had felony charges and convictions. Both of them had driven drunk, had been pulled over, and then taken into ICE custody. And because ICE is not allowed to detain people that they can't deport, and since there is no deporting anymore, those two illegal immigrants were then just released after drunk driving. So you as a citizen, if you drunk drive, you're going to go to jail, and you're going to have to go through the court process and all that stuff. But if you renounce your citizenship and go into ICE custody, and ICE isn't allowed to deport you, then you just get out of jail free. No problem at all. And so this is a lovely specific, again, those specifically things that happened this week was we had two drunk drivers. Now that's happening within the first few weeks of this policy going into effect. I can imagine that sort of stuff's going on all over the country right now. And you imagine that sort of thing happening with rapes and murders and all kinds of stuff. So we actually had a clip of Joe Biden during the campaign trail saying he didn't think drunk driving should be a big deal and that shouldn't be something that you should get deported for, which is kind of wild because I think his story about how his wife got killed was that it was a drunk driver. Even though that was verified false, that was the story that Biden told, was that the guy was drunk, even though, again, proven fact check, that was not true at all. Biden made that up. Now, somebody did crash into his wife and killed her, but he was not drunk at the time. But that's the story that Biden tells, is that he's drunk. But at the same time, he's saying, well, drunk driving is no big deal. It could only murder somebody's wife. It's not a big deal or anything like that. We shouldn't deport somebody for that. Nuts.
Right. He also brought up again recently the lie of him landing in the Middle East at a U.S. base under fire from snipers.
What is it about? What do you think it is about the elected officials, non-military elected officials, thinking that they're like getting shot at gives them some kind of credibility? What do you think the reasoning behind that is?
I don't know. I find it offensive, but I don't get how you think that gives you credibility. maybe they're trying to say, oh, my life has also been on the line. I understand how soldiers feel because I was in a small fraction of the danger they've been in. No, you bullshit. You don't know what it's like at all. And I'm not even saying that I know what it's like to be in like what a special forces guy goes through. That's not my role in the military.
Yeah,
but I find it offensive for them to say that they have any kind of idea what it's like, and especially to lie about it. This makes it so much worse.
Yeah, I think it's this kind of attempt to create this kind of like foxhole brother mentality where it's like, we went to war together, we were shot at together, we bled together, just like you, even though it's like not true at all. And then, from a civilian perspective, there's kind of this, I know it's not true, but there's like a general perception of like anybody in the military is in a combat role. Like there's not, if you're just a civilian not thinking critically about it, you just your perception of the military is everybody's in a combat role. And so the politicians saying like, oh, well, like I was being shot at. It's like, wow, like you're just like the military. You're getting shot at, even though I know realistically, like most positions of the military are non-combat roles. So I think that's what they're trying to do is just create this essentially stolen valor or an attempt at maybe fraudulent valor.
Yeah. That's basically what it is. Stolen valor is a good way to equate it.
I would imagine too. I think valor probably is using it now. I think valor is kind of the correct word that they're going there for. They're trying to explain themselves as doing like a brave thing for their country, which is kind of the idea of the valor. Yeah. But they're forging it. It's forged valor.
Yeah, but he bravely got off a plane with an escort under no fire, waving and smiling at dignitaries and officers. He was bravely, slowly walked across the flight line to a car that was waiting for him. That wasn't brave. And he definitely was under fire. But so, yes, he lied again. So another example of the vulnerabilities we have right now is, so we brought up how Biden has hamstringed our first line of defense at the border. Our border protection system has been hamstringed and just disabled to the point that criminals are being released onto the streets. Not just criminals. That some of our adversaries overseas very much want to get agents and terrorists into our country to form cells, to indoctrinate, and then to move on to either do terrorist actions themselves or take Americans that they have been able to convince to do the terrorist acts for them. See, it's actually far smarter for them. Instead of sending your agent to go die, send agents to create local lone wolves.
Did you get in there the thing about Biden suspending the block on China from installing power and communications equipment?
It's further down.
Okay.
It's 2 lines down, actually. So the since in 2021, so far, like this is just month 2, we've had a total of 14 Iranians nationals come across the border that were caught. Again, a lot of those who people coming across the border are not being caught because the lack of manning, a lack of physical barriers. So 14 total, 11 in the last week as of the 3rd. So sorry, no, as of last week, yeah. So 11 in a week caught. And they're coming in nearly perfect pairs of male and female, so they're getting the benefit of the family thing. So you can't they're more likely to be released also because they're a family group. So we have a heightened threat of, like, Iran is trying to do everything they can to harm us. They're also a very desperate nation right now because we've harmed them a lot and they have internal strife. I would not be surprised if there was a large-scale terrorist attack in our country thanks to the vulnerabilities that Biden has created. Another vulnerability is about 80% of the U.S. critical infrastructure power plants, water treatment, food production, and distribution, and communication, etc., are owned by the public sector, which is not inherently bad. It's just that many of these private companies lack the resources and the know-how to properly secure their operations. Mostly, we're talking about being secured against cyber threats. So that is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. Yes. Also, back to what we were talking about here. So the Biden admin also is no help. One of their first acts was to pause a Trump-era executive order or fully rescind. I forget which one it was. Is either paused or fully rescind.
Paused for 90 days.
That restricted any acquisition, importation, transfer, or installation of any bulk power system electronic equipment designed, developed, manufactured, or supplied by person owned by, controlled by, or subject to the jurisdiction of or direction of a foreign adversary. All those words means no tech parts made in China could be used in our critical infrastructure.
So China couldn't own power systems or power plants or power delivery systems. Now, because Biden paused it, China just has 90 days to fire sale, buy up as much of the power grid as they possibly can. And they don't need to get into a lot of it because our grid is so interconnected and it's not smart. So you can't isolate it. Within a city, it might have a smart grid, but not broadly. So the grids can't be isolated against each other. If you get a power plant and you get into the grid, you're hooked into the whole thing. Now there's regional stuff like that, but just having access to a single power plant and owning it, if China does, which they do, they already had before this even happened, they had power plants that they owned, through lots and lots of shell corporations. But having access to the grid, how the grid's laid out, how different systems work to prevent surges and all that stuff, that gives them so much information and so much egress into the power systems that they really can just shut those down at any time. And you've got egress. What's that?
Ingress or egress?
Whichever one is the correct word to use. You've got stuff like military bases though that are on the power grid, and a lot of them suck up a lot of power. And maybe if times got tough. Dyer, don't answer this. It's probably classified. Nope. I mean, if times got tough, I'm sure that they could power up a lot of their systems with backup generators, but that's not ideal. And you would imagine that we would like to have our key military installations being able to run off the grid. But if China wants to go to war with us, they just flip the switch, and maybe the whole base doesn't go down, but certainly the surrounding towns go down. You lose a lot of that support infrastructure because we've designed a lot of our military bases work is they're integrated into their communities, and those communities are dependent on public infrastructure. And if that stuff goes down because China takes it down, well, now your base is hobbling along. It's not good for military footing. It's not good for civilian footing. There's no good reason to allow China to purchase and operate power plants in our country. But I guess, Biden needs his 2 stacks, and he needs, make sure his son's getting paid for that consulting hours, and, make sure China's allowed to eat our lunch and all that stuff.
You're right. I can't touch on what the military can or cannot do or their vulnerabilities. It's just a whole area I can't talk about.
You don't need to explain that. I already said it for you. You can just move on.
Yeah, but like I said, our country in its entirety, it's many different aspects, many different parts of our critical infrastructure, because critical infrastructure is way more than just power and water, right? There's a lot more that makes up critical infrastructure that allows our society to continue operating. And many of them are undefended or poorly defended. And Trump actually, to his credit, took many steps towards hardening those soft targets, as well as a part of that is independence of our resources. Being able to survive off of what we produce locally makes us less vulnerable to attack from outside sources that we are dependent on. The coronavirus pandemic was a great example of a critical infrastructure that was harmed by prior policy, where we have so much of our medical infrastructure, which is also part of critical infrastructure, that is dependent on stuff from China. One of our greatest adversaries, we depend on them for basic medical supplies. That's a huge, huge error. That's still not corrected yet.
And probably will never be corrected.
Oh, thanks for your optimism.
Well, people don't have to vote. It's consequences. Alrighty, so ready for our next story?
Absolutely.
All right. Did Trump sell out America? Now, I think it's funny. I know not a lot of you, but some of you in the past have criticized us as being two in the bag for Trump, even though we've spent multiple hours criticizing Trump as an idiot for a lot of the decisions that he did. I remember in particular, we had spent like almost 2 hours talking about Trump doing something stupid, and we were pissed at him for it. And then the next episode, somebody in chat had said that we were in the bag for Trump, which is just hilarious. But if you were wondering if we're in the bag for Trump, we're not. We are ideologues. We are not for people. We're not cultists. We have an ideology. We're not cultists of personality. So, there was an interesting story that we saw last week that concerned Dyer and I. There's a lot of implications to it as to things that Trump was doing or not doing, and it surrounded Parler. So, Parler recently fired before this. Well, recently is maybe a little too editorialized. Within the last year, this was before the it was back in the summertime, I think. Parler CEO John Matz went to the media last week. Again, he had been fired about a year ago, to address his firing. During an interview with HBO's Axios, this John Matz accused Parler of firing him because he opposed a possible 40% buyout of the company by Donald Trump. He claims that this buyout was being negotiated by the Trump campaign during last summer, which, if true, is pretty big, because that would mean that... So part of this deal was that if Trump agreed to use Parler exclusively instead of Twitter or Facebook or anything else, if Trump agreed to use Parler exclusively, they would give him a 40% stake in the company. That's what Matz was accusing Parler and Trump of doing. Now, the specifics in the story are that it was the Trump organization and the Trump campaign that were negotiating this. It's unknown and unlikely that Trump himself was personally involved in these negotiations. But this was going on over the summer, and it kind of makes you wonder, why wasn't Trump getting on Parler when it was so clear that Twitter was just this giant, ridiculous shithole? And, everybody kept saying, like, well, Trump just needs to get on Gab, he needs to get on Parler, he needs to get on something else, and it would just drive this crazy conversation. It would make those platforms explode. It would tank Twitter. It'd be great. He needs to do it. Twitter's awful. And now it might seem like, it appears to me that if this story is true, if the Trump campaign and the Trump organization were trying to negotiate a 40% buyout to have him parlay exclusively on Parler, did the reason that Trump didn't switch to Parler, is it because they were waiting to get this bribe money, basically? And if we hadn't had this bribe of a 40% stake in Parler, is it possible that the Trump campaign or Trump himself would have decided to go to Parler earlier? And, imagine how the world would have turned out differently if back in last February, Trump had joined Parler and started using Parler exclusively.
Especially when Twitter was telegraphing so far in advance that they were going to silence him. It was a foregone conclusion that he should have moved to a place where he wouldn't have been silenced. And that would actually probably would give him some protection to Parler from being destroyed by other companies.
Well, and it would have been a big boon for free speech, right? Because then Twitter wouldn't have had so much power over the narrative.
So if this story is true, Trump using his political office to make a financial transaction that would have benefited him personally greatly would have been extremely illegal. And something that we would obviously be very opposed to and criticize. That is not what you should be doing with your political office. And also, to make it worse, he would be making if this is true, he would be making a decision to not use Parler, which would have benefited him, the people he supports, and he would have been choosing not to do something good for America because it didn't financially benefit him.
It's also strange too because as you're saying, it would have been illegal for him to do this transaction while he was in office, and so this proposal, again, this is what's being reported. Whether or not this is true, up for you guys. I personally, I think it's probably got a lot of merit to it. But again, we only have this one. We only have this one source, so take it with that much credibility, I guess. But assuming that this is all true, Parler would have had to have been assuming that the Trump administration would have also had to have been assuming that Trump wasn't going to win in the election, because if Trump this would not have been a deal that would have been able to go through while Trump was in the presidency. So why would you start the negotiation of a deal if you thought that you couldn't execute on it for 4 years? That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, there's some holes in this. But if this is true, and I would like some more which, I don't think that we're going to get any more investigation out of this, but it'd be nice. I would like to see some more investigation into this because, again, if it turns out that Trump went down with the ship on Twitter just because he was holding out, or his campaign was holding out for a 40% stake in Parler, that's really, really shitty.
So now I'm going to play devil's advocate on this thing, okay?
Yeah.
So Mr. Matz here, he started his media tour a few days prior to the kickoff of the impeachment. And he started on Fox News, where he initially made the claim that he did not know why he was fired, and that the board of Parler had been mostly silent, and he'd been forced to go public to explain, because people were wondering, hey, why were you fired? People were asking the question, and he felt he had to make a public statement about it. And that was the way it was phrased, that he didn't give any information about the 40% buyout or Trump buying part of the company or influenced the company. All this came out later when he started doing interviews with the Democrat-owned media, particularly Axios, right? So why did he not know then? But then a few days later, he does know. And why the timing? He was fired a year ago, but why right around the time of impeachment does this come out, right? It seems like an odd coincidence. Also, Trump would have to be incredibly stupid, or people working for Trump would have to be incredibly stupid or trying to implicate him in a serious crime for him to do this. So I am going to want to know more. I would like to, before I believe this, I need to have more evidence rather than just his word about it. Now, there's obviously more. Like, if this is true, there's other people that know. There's a bunch of people in Parler. The entire board of Parler would have been a part of this. A bunch of people who are secretaries and interns who are involved in the company would be aware of this going on. It wouldn't be just this guy. So it shouldn't be unreasonable to ask for other evidence. See, the reason why we criticized Biden for his very obvious peddling of his office wasn't because we believed Bob Alinsky. We just believed someone who came out and was a whistleblower. No. Bob Alinsky came out with receipts, and his receipts were matched up to receipts we already had from other individuals. We had a mountain of evidence against Biden and him selling his political office. So we believe that because of evidence, not just claims. This guy here is making a claim. It is very salacious, and if it's true, we're very opposed to it and would want there to be consequences. But I will not say what he said is true until we have the receipts.
Fair enough. Next story.
Yep. Jeez,
right.
How many stories do we have?
I don't know, Dyer. Why did you write so many stories? Jesus Christ.
17 pages of bullet points.
I didn't write any of the notes today. You wrote more notes than we normally write. I don't know what you were thinking.
There's something wrong with me. I'm sorry.
Why did you waste this much time on this? Just
I don't know.
Cut out some of the stories.
We could do the rest on the next show if you want.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to end up having to do that, but we'll do this story. Okay, so, guns. Not good guns, though. This is a bad gun story. Okay, so there's new gun laws being proposed in the House, which are actually so ridiculous. There's actually speculation that they might not even pass the Democrats because, there's the crazy Democrats, and then there is the Democrats that are kind of
crazier Democrats.
Well, there are the Democrats that are kind of they're kind of just barely hanging on to their district, especially after the last election where we saw kind of a real red wave of just bloodied the Democrats in the House. They lost 18 seats or something crazy. So the gun bill that's being proposed is actually so severe that they think that it might not actually pass just because the Democrats aren't going to support it either. Okay, so, but it's still a possibility. So with the Democrats in control of the levers of power, they are now moving quickly to pass multiple bills through Congress to remove our Second Amendment rights. And they're doing this before the stimulus bill. They are continuing their strategy of
strategy
of incremental change that makes incremental change. I don't think this one's incremental.
So this is not one bill; it's multiple bills actually.
Okay. Well, it's incremental in the same way that it turn the knob from 1 to 11 as quickly as possible.
The reason why it's multiple bills is so that anyone that they're kind of testing, see how far they can go. And if any one of the things in the bills they're trying to pass is too far, well, then just that one part is not getting passed. Everything else gets passed, you see?
Yeah. All right, so let's see here. So they're trying to make gun ownership as prohibitive and restrictive as possible, extremely complicated, making it expensive, all trying to limit gun ownership to the elites, such as themselves. Safety is for those in power, not for the rabble like us.
Yep. The first in a series of bills coming out is the House is H.R. 112, which would establish a 10-day waiting period for all gun purchases. The second is H.R. 8, which expands the scope of federal background checks and requires nearly all purchasers of firearms to undergo a background check, including private transactions. That's a huge change.
Now, I think I had said earlier in the show, or maybe it was just when I was talking to Dyer earlier, there is a large kind of contingency of state houses that are trying quickly to pass legislation at the state level that would block federal gun restrictions. What's that?
It's also in the story.
Where?
Further down. This is multiple small stories that are all on guns.
Oh, okay. I thought just this section because you've got a line there. Okay. Well, I guess I'll wait for that part then.
So next part of the story?
Sure. Okay. So the Democrats have made it clear that more bills are the Democrats made it clear more bills are what? Are what did you write? Were you drunk?
Maybe.
5 of the 6 words were wrong. How am I supposed to read that? The Democrats have made it clear more bills are on the way. Texas Democrat Rep. Sheila Jackson has proposed a gun control bill that would create a national firearm registry, set minimum gun ownership age at 21, and require licensing and psychological evaluations. I think Rep. Sheila Jackson is the one who stated that an AR-15 weighs as much as 5 boxes. Am I correct?
Yes, she did actually.
Yes.
It said it fired 50 cal, I think.
Yes,
the proposed,
which I mean, you can get one that fires 50 cal, but not that's prohibitively expensive on its own.
So the proposed bill, which is called the Shabika Sheikh Firearms Licensing and Registration Act, would make it a crime to possess a firearm or ammunition without the new license or sell one to someone who doesn't have said license. So you would need to have a new license to own a gun. And to get that license, it would require gun owners to pay for insurance, and it would, which is like $800 per a year, and a ban on ammunition of .50 caliber or greater, except for law enforcement, and it would limit the range of, and also would limit range of security personnel. So
you know what? You know, if they ban 50 cal, what's going to happen is that some company is going to make a 49 cal rifle, and that'll just become the new. That'll become the new thing. So this license thing is concerning because you've got some states who do this already, where they've at the state level they've got licensing requirements, and so
Infidel said 3D printing is the solution. Actually, no, they'd still require you to have this license to 3D print your own guns. Yep,
yeah, but if they don't, I think he's saying because they wouldn't know about the purchase, Dyer.
Okay, but 3D printing is actually currently legal. You know, like, you don't have to go through any sort of registration process right now. They basically are making 3D printing illegal, where it isn't currently.
Yeah, I think one of the bills is also trying to outlaw the 80% receivers that you can drill out on your own.
Oh,
you know about that?
Not
okay, so you know what's that?
I don't have that one in here. No, sorry.
Okay, yeah, you know about the 80% receivers.
Yep.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, you can get an 80% receiver, which is the main part of an AR-15 that like makes it go pew. And if you get it 80% where there's still metal in blocking where it would actually load the bullets in it, so it doesn't work as is. That's why they say it's 80%. You don't have to get a serial number on it, which means it's not registered, and it's not tracked or serialized or anything like that. So you can get this receiver, and this is what they call ghost guns, because all of the other parts of an AR-15, you don't have to have any kind of anything to buy them. The receiver is the only part of the gun that is restricted. Now again, there's certain parts that you're not allowed to buy, like pump stocks and stuff like that. But in general, all the other parts, if they're legal to buy and own, then you can get them without any kind of tracking or anything like that on them. But you get an 80% receiver because you don't want to be tracked on it, and then you can drill it out on your own with a drill press. Now, there's a lot of ways to, you're not allowed to show this on the internet and stuff like that, but everybody kind of knows how to do it. It's not that hard to do. But there's a bill right now, one of these bills, if I'm remembering it correctly, it's trying to outlaw these 80% receivers. And I think one of the ways they're going about it is by making people register drill presses, which is weird. I might be wrong on that, but that's one of the things I'd heard on
the
that.
Fuck?
Yeah, I know. It's
why are you making a registration for drill presses? Are you gonna do like hammers next?
Yes. Well, you get a license for knives in the UK, or potato peelers.
I should not laugh at this then.
No, so but on the licenses, so New Jersey does this. So New Jersey has licenses, and what New Jersey does is it requires you to have a license to get a gun, but they just don't give you a license. So they've got this really ridiculous, complicated process to get a license. You'll make you call one department, and then that department will say, nope, that's not our job. They'll make you call the other department, and the other department will make you call the first one again, and they make you go back and forth. And then there's waiting periods at each stage. There's several stages for each part of it. And then, maybe after 90 days, if you're really lucky, and hundreds of dollars and dozens of hours later, maybe you'll get a license.
But if you're also part of a conservative group, like, the Turning Point USA, they might just say, oh, sorry, we can't give you a license because you're part of a hate group.
Yes. So we're going to start seeing stuff like that. So at the federal level, that's what they'll end up doing, is they'll say, okay, you got to get a license to get a gun. Everybody's like, okay, like that sucks, but like, okay, I'll just go get my license. And then they'll say, well, we're not giving out any more licenses today. And there'll just never be any licenses. This was some of the strategies that they did early on, before we had the revolution, that people didn't like, was there would be stamps. You require you to have stamps for certain goods, and then they just wouldn't give out stamps. Like, there was just no stamps to be had, and so now you can't have those. Now you can't have those goods. It was a way of kind of outlawing them without really outlawing them. It was just like, well, guns aren't illegal. You just have to have the stamp. It's like, well, where do I get the stamp? Well, we don't make the stamps. Oh, okay.
All right. So I already covered that part, so it's up to you.
Okay. All right, so gun owners would also have to complete government training courses, have a clean record, and register their firearms with the federal government. Registry information would be available to law enforcement from the local and federal level, as well as the U.S. military. Wait, so the military... Wait a second. So is that saying that the U.S. military would have access to civilian records?
Yep.
That's kind of crossing streams, isn't it?
Yes.
Gotcha. All right. So the display of an antique firearm in one's home would require a federal firearms license and an additional license under proposal. So what I'm seeing that they want to include the U.S. military into the kind of slipstream of the registry database. What I am seeing on that is a preemptive measure to do now, and what you might see that's kind of setting the groundwork for 5, 10, 20 years from now, when they do decide that they want to go do a gun grab, and they'll use the U.S. military to do it, and the U.S. military will already have had access to those databases. They don't need to pass any additional legislation or anything like that. It's setting those little building blocks so that it's at some point in the future, it's easier and easier to do that bulk gun confiscation, because I think we all know how it's going to end if they send in police. They're not equipped to do something like that in America, to pull out that many guns. The only possible way of doing it would be with the military, because you're going to see people saying, no, I'm not giving you, well, I'll give you a couple grains of my gun, in 3-shot bursts, but like, I'm not going to give you the whole thing at once. And the only ones that are equipped to deal with that would be the military. But the military is not allowed to operate against civilians on U.S. soil. But if you start chipping away at some of the other things, saying like, okay, like the Democrats think, in 10 years, we'll get to that bridge when we get to it. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, when we want the U.S. military to go into people's homes and take their guns. We'll get to that eventually. But in the meantime, we can start preparing them for that by making sure that when we make a registry, the U.S. military is included in that. I can't see any other reason for including the U.S. military on a gun registry, other than at some point you expect in the future the U.S. military will be involved in using that registration database as a checklist to go down and visit people's houses. There's really no other conceivable reason why the U.S. military would have an interest in that registry database.
This would bypass the fact that state registration is not available at the federal level immediately, and not shared between states. So this is a bypass for making sure that the federal government can take action where the states would not provide that information.
Yeah. So like we were saying earlier, there's state legislators trying to make things to insulate their state from what they are sure is coming down the pike for gun control. But if some of these federal mandates say, just the federal government's in charge of all the information on it, there's not going to be a whole lot that the states can do.
Bundy Ranch is a great example of federal government trying to take action and the local civilian populace responding with arms and stopping temporarily the illegal action by the state. But did not end up very well for the Bundys in the end, if you remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you read the whole thing?
Yeah, I read all my part. You're
cool.
On the
so there would also be a licensing for military-style weapons, in quotations, which the bill defines as a broad range of semi-automatic rifles and handguns, as well as some shotguns. There's basically no rhyme or reason. I could not give you an outline of like a characteristic other than it's a gun they don't like. So that it's kind of a squishy, basically popular guns. And they required a license. That's the only common denominator I could see. So requiring a license is another way of saying something is banned without saying that is banned. the government need only make that the license be so expensive or so hard to get or impossible to get for it effectively to have banned that right. It allows you to ban only people you want to target as well, such as people that you've falsely accused of being a part of a white supremacist group, or a group that you've labeled as white supremacists, whether they do have those beliefs or not, whether or not they're actually led by a black man or not. It doesn't matter. If they say it's a white supremacist group and they label it a terrorist group like they've labeled recently the Proud Boys, well, now you can't own a gun. Anyone who has ever been hospitalized due to mental illness or drug or alcohol abuse or homicidal or suicidal thoughts or brain disease would also not be eligible to obtain a firearm, even if those were temporary things that they've recovered from.
Yep. Jeez. I two of the guns that I have are competition. They're part of like that manufacturer's like competition line, and I wonder if, even though it's specifically designed as a competition weapon, I wonder if they would try and say like, well, it's military grade. Like, no, like military wouldn't use a competition grade rifle. They would use a military grade rifle. Like the competition grade one is designed for competition, so it's specifically not a military grade one.
So Lyon's completely right about this. He says that there should be an online campaign that's saying that this is prohibiting black people from having guns. Actually, no, this is like initially the states that they're going to actually want to implement this are going to be mostly victimizing or to a large degree victimizing black communities where the right to self-defense is more needed. Not that they deserve it more, just they actually have more opportunities to defend themselves because there's more violent crime in those areas. And though it is the minority people in those communities,
it's just low-income areas in general.
Yes,
right?
Of course, right. And that's the reason. So they're actually hurting low-income, impoverished people in large cities, and a larger proportion of minority groups are going to be affected by the removal of their ability to defend themselves. And this already exists in Democrat cities. Like there's already Democrat cities where they have very extreme gun control or gun restrictions that make it virtually impossible for anyone who is less wealthy to own a gun. So those people already don't have the ability to defend themselves, and the guns that exist are the ones that are being held by criminals who don't follow the law in the first place.
You have this. This is pretty wild too. They want to going back again. I just can't get off of this. That they want to include the U.S. military in this is that this is the party that is openly demonized and talked about and actually implemented in several locations defunding the police. They want to remove as much civilian law enforcement as possible. At the same time, they're starting to include the U.S. military into civilian law enforcement. They're starting to chip away at that separation. And that's it's so hard to like talk about or describe it, because the only thing you can think about are just the most dictatorial, awful fascist regimes of the last century, and just this is how it happens: is you remove civilian law enforcement, you remove their role as much as possible, and then you start introducing the military into a civilian law enforcement role. And then now you've just got this dictatorial control. I mean, they want to talk about the left has been bitching about militarization of the police for the last decade. Well, now their position is like, well, instead of militarizing the police, let's just have the military.
You know, what bothers me the most about this is that they're telling us we need to wear 3 masks, and they've taken theirs off completely. Yes.
I mean, what is it? What else do you think that the military would possibly do with access to the a gun registration database? Like what would you do with it? Like what are the possible things that could be done with that? If you can speculate.
I absolutely cannot.
Okay.
But I am very opposed to this.
Alrighty, so let's see. So psychological processes that they're proposing. would take into account psychological conditions of members of the licensee's household.
Be gone from me, you soy boy beta cock. The transaction is complete.
Happy Valentine's Day. Hopefully you will be mine, because otherwise you will be Slowpokes. And nobody wants that except for Slowpoke.
Well, thank you very much for the $10, Triumvirate. I will. You make a compelling case to pick you first, so I'll go ahead and do that. Dyer, I guess you get Slowpoke. I called Triumvirate already.
Hey, is my wife not an option?
No.
Shit. Damn it. Keep the plunger away from me, please. It's a callback to an old joke.
Yeah. All right. So, so they're saying in the psychological test, they're also want to test any members of your household. So that's pretty wild too. So now you're gonna have to, like, for you to have a gun, like your all the people that live with you, like your family or your friends
and
or your
ex-spouses, by the way, are included.
Well, there's usually a reason why they're ex-spouses, and a lot of those reasons tend to be because they're crazy. So if you have a crazy ex-wife, no more guns for you.
Right. So if you have a divorcee, then they'll probably say something about you that'll further result in you not being able to have a gun. This is just absolutely is blatantly obvious that they are setting up the groundwork for allowing them to disarm the populace, but also more target the people, the groups they don't like. And they're going to constantly say, it's because of the terrorists. We're trying to protect the children from the terrorists, Fox. You gotta let us do this. It's not about taking about human rights or your right to self-defense. It's just the criminals, the terrorists, and white nationalists.
Among the crimes that illegal immigrants can commit and not be deported, because, spoiler alert, it's all the crimes, but also included in all the crimes are gun crimes. So illegal immigrants that are here and are members of gangs such as MS-13 and are found to have guns that they're not allowed to possess, they are free to go, just like all the drunk drivers. So it's not about no guns in general. It's about no guns for you, the citizen.
Right. And you may remember one of the most famous cases that Trump had brought out was the woman who was killed by an illegal alien who had been deported multiple times and then released again, and he had committed violent crimes in the past, and he ended up shooting her at the pier in California and killing her. So that person's dead directly because of Democrat policy.
Yeah.
Next story. Next part of the story.
Okay, so some states are taking action to protect their own states. Republican lawmakers in Missouri are focused this session on what they will be calling the Second Amendment Preservation Act through two bills, Senate Bill 39 and House Bill 85. The bills protect Missourians from any strict gun control rules that might come down from the Biden administration.
They essentially don't allow police to enforce the laws related to guns that could come down from any federal government, whatever they might pass. Any law that might pass in Congress, they're saying they cannot be enforced in Missouri. Sheriff Jim Abbott, a major supporter of the Second Amendment, agrees with the intent, but he says that there's an issue with the language of those bills that could hamper the ability to do things that they do want to investigate, gun crimes that actually do exist. So the bills are not completed yet. He's just saying, yes, this is a good bill. It just needs to be modified a little bit to not hamstring local enforcement of actual crimes.
Yeah, and similar to the way Florida is doing their anti-censorship bill we talked about last time. If these are bills that are successful and that they get some of the bugs worked out and they get passed in their various states, other states need to start picking up these bills and passing them the same way. And this is why you might imagine that the Democrats want to have the U.S. military roped into the database, because if you can't get the state, local, and city cops to enforce it, well,
bingo. The
only thing that's left for the federal government would be possibly federalizing the National Guard or just directly deploying troops. That might seem like it's a far ways off. And it may well be a far ways off, but this is, again, this is setting a building block a foundational building block of the U.S. military being able to go in and take guns is that they would need to have access to this data. So the Democrats are building that into this bill already, and that's again, will we get there? I don't know. I hope we don't, but we're taking a step in that direction. It's I can't sit here and just say, well, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think that they're ever going to do that, but I don't know. I mean, they're taking a step toward it. The only thing I could possibly imagine for having the U.S. military involved is that they expect the U.S. military to be involved at some point.
And the Democrats, they were criticizing Trump for saying that he was going to deploy the National Guard after months of violence from BLM, where local authorities were refusing to employ their police. And when the individuals, the terrorists were being arrested, their legal system was releasing them without any charges. Based on the very real harm that these local municipalities were inflicting upon their own people, Trump threatened to send the National Guard in to protect the people, to enforce federal law, and also, basically what they're considering doing here. So they criticize Trump for threatening that, but in the end, they're planning to, if their laws are not enforced by local municipalities, actually using federal police, federal agents, and possibly the military to enforce federal law within states where states do not want to enforce them. That is scary.
Triumvirate says that if we get 38 states to pass these laws, then they can become constitutional amendments. Yes, we should have a constitutional amendment that protects gun ownership, Triumvirate. I totally agree.
If only they hadn't thought of that in the beginning.
If only, man. I just
though if they did do that, they probably would have had like a very old timey way of phrasing things that might be one day later on being misconstrued.
Sargon was talking about this the other day, and he said, shall not be infringed. He just loves saying that. He's like, I can't think of, there is no other sentence in the English language that is more precise than that. Shall not be infringed. There's no way to misconstrue what that means. It's not like, well,
you gotta change the meaning of words.
Yes. He's like, it is one of the most clearly defined sentences in the English language, and we just let them trample all over it.
We forgot something. Okay, during the impeachment hearing, they brought up a quote from the Constitution, and then to make their point, they edited the Constitution by adding in words that weren't there to support their argument for impeachment. Like, holy shit! So we can just add anything to the Constitution, and then that's our argument. That supports our argument.
Yes.
Why don't we then do that here? Okay, let's say shall not be infringed. Yes, this also includes private gun ownership. I gotta write that in, and now that becomes fact because I wrote it on the Constitution. It's now part of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a picture of that. I can't find one. I think Google's
it was so absurd. How is that evidence? You are making an argument against Trump that he has incited violence, and your argument for that, you just live edit the evidence against it.
Like the one Dyer's talking about. I'm trying to find a picture of it, but they had a picture of an excerpt from the Constitution and just had an editor's note where they had red pen on it and crossed out a word, and then they wrote a little caret and then wrote other words underneath of it. And I was like, what on earth is this? What in what country are we in where you're just doing this live edit to the Constitution?
But I mean, it creates an interesting precedent. We can just do that for every argument moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, realistically. Let's see here. I can't find it. Alrighty, so let's see here. Other states. So we have some states that are trying to help out their citizens, and then we have other states that are doing the exact opposite. So Virginia lawmakers narrowly passed a bill, a proposed measure to ban the sale of assault-style weapons on Tuesday.
Last Tuesday.
What's that?
Last Tuesday.
So Virginia, again, is, the fuckheads who can't be bothered to get off their stupid, lazy fucking asses and go vote, and now they've lost their gun rights.
Yep.
So, think your vote doesn't matter. It does.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Last time they did a gun ban, which was not that long ago, so it's recent memory, the sheriffs and local police departments in Virginia in most of the counties refused to enforce it, right?
Yeah.
But now those officers hypothetically could be arrested both by the state and federal officers for refusing to impose this unconstitutional law. You, by refusing to vote, have taken these patriots and put them in jeopardy. Good job. Fuck you guys.
Yeah.
Also, I want to point out there was a sob story in the news. It was so sad. It was about Oakland, California, and how recently they've, after the election, with all the influx of illegal immigrants who are also criminals into the state, that there's been a murder like every other day for a long time in Oakland. There's been a lot of other kinds of violence, but just murders is that frequent, and lots of theft, lots of people getting severely wounded in crimes. And they're like, it's never been this bad before. I'm like, well, you know what? It's your goddamn fault.
Yep.
You vote for this shit. Congratulations. It's become a complete shithole.
Alrighty. Next story? Maybe the last story.
No, I mean, how long has the show been going? 3 hours now?
Yeah.
I think we're good for tonight.
Okay. Well,
that's a nothing story anyways. So yeah, this has been fun, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Sorry about missing the other Saturday a little while back. We'll try to be a little more consistent so we can start receiving.
Well, I've only missed one Saturday. I mean,
yeah, but it was a kind of a busy news week we missed. I'm gonna distribute the treasure chest real quick so you guys can get your bits, your whatever you call these things.
The treasure chest.
Yeah, it's 23 seconds.
Sounds dirty.
I do like chests. They're my favorite part of the day. Nothing. Best part of waking up.
Gay.
Yeah. Breasts are gay. You heard it here, folks.
Yes. No, you said chest.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you for the picture there, Timberwolf. All right, we'll see you guys on the next show. You guys have been awesome.
I don't know how you guys are supposed to give us lemons. Dyer's going to look into that as to if there's a toggle or something. But
no, it's not a toggle. We haven't done. We need to do enough shows in a row.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Wow. Within a time period, because we missed shows, there wasn't enough. There wasn't 3 shows in our replays.
Yeah,
that was our fault.
All right,
see you guys later.
Yep. See y'all.
All right, we'll
Bye. Shaviz signing off.